The morning sun painted long shadows across the shooting range at Camp Pendleton, turning the California dust into something almost beautiful. Master Chief Robert Sullivan stood with his arms crossed, watching the new arrivals line up for weapons qualification with the kind of patience that only came from 3 decades of separating potential from pretense. At 58 years old, with silver hair and a scar running down his neck like a pale lightning bolt, Hawk had seen enough Marines to know that most would approach the Barrett 50 caliber with the appropriate mix of respect and fear. The weapon was not forgiving. It was not designed to be. But the woman moving toward the firing line carried herself differently. Staff Sergeant Hannah Price looked young even by Marine Corps standards. 25 years old, with hair the color of wheat fields and eyes like winter sky. She moved with an economy of motion that suggested countless hours of practice, each step deliberate and measured. Hawk had been called Hawk since Mogadishu in '93, when a Somali militiaman's machete had opened his throat and he had killed the man anyway. Silent as a bird of prey, despite the blood. The name stuck because it fit. He saw things others missed. And what he saw in Hannah Price made him uneasy in a way he could not immediately explain. The Barrett lay before her like some ancient instrument of war, all harsh angles and brutal purpose. Most shooters approached it the way civilians approach rattlesnakes, with visible tension in their shoulders and a tightness around their eyes that spoke of anticipated violence. The 50 caliber round could stop a vehicle at a mile. It could punch through concrete walls and turn cover into concealment, turning concealment into fatal illusion. The recoil alone had sent unprepared shooters to the medical tent with bruised shoulders and loosened teeth. Hannah circled the weapon slowly, her fingers tracing the barrel with the delicate touch of a surgeon examining a patient before an operation. She checked the scope mounts with practiced precision, tested the bipod legs with gentle pressure, chambered the first round with a smooth action that suggested muscle memory rather than conscious thought. When she finally settled behind the rifle, something remarkable happened. She relaxed. Hawk had qualified hundreds of Marines on the Barrett. Hell, he had qualified SEALs, Rangers, Force Recon operators who had spent years in the teams. Most of them tensed when they got behind the Big 50. Their shoulders rose. Their breathing quickened. The weapon demanded respect, and respect looked like tension. But Hannah Price looked like she was coming home. The target sat 800 meters downrange, a standard distance for qualification, but far enough to separate the skilled from the merely adequate. A light crosswind moved across the range, maybe 5 miles per hour from the west. Enough to matter at that distance, but not enough to be dramatic. Hannah made no show of reading the wind flags. She simply adjusted her position by millimeters, her body language suggesting she could feel the air moving across her skin the way a sailor feels the sea. The first shot cracked across the range like God's own thunderclap. Through his binoculars, Hawk watched the target paper shudder as the massive bullet punched through dead center. The sound echoed off the hills behind the range and rolled away into the morning. Hannah did not celebrate, did not smile or pump her fist or show any visible satisfaction. She simply chambered the next round with the same mechanical precision, her breathing steady and controlled. The second shot followed 30 seconds later, another perfect center hit. Then a third. By the fourth shot, the other range instructors had stopped their own activities to watch. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez lowered his binoculars and shook his head slowly, the universal gesture of a professional, witnessing something beyond his experience. By the sixth shot, a small crowd had gathered behind the firing line, all of them staring in the kind of silence that follows unexpected excellence. Hannah fired 15 rounds in total, 15 shots that could have been placed by a machine for their consistency and precision. When she finally set the rifle down and stood, rising from the prone position with fluid grace, there was polite applause from the gathered Marines and instructors. She acknowledged it with a brief nod, nothing more, and then began the process of cleaning the weapon with the same methodical attention she had shown in firing it. Hawk approached her as she worked, his boots crunching on the gravel. Up close, he could see details that distance had hidden. Calluses on her trigger finger, worn smooth by thousands of repetitions. Slight squint lines around her eyes from years of peering through scopes in bright sunlight. And something else. Something in the set of her jaw and the distance in her gaze that he recognized from the mirror. The look of someone who had seen things they would rather forget. "Outstanding shooting, Staff Sergeant," Hawk said, extending his hand. "Master Chief Sullivan, Naval Special Warfare. Hannah looked up from the Barrett's bolt assembly, her blue eyes meeting his with a directness that was both respectful and confident. Thank you, Master Chief. Just doing what I was trained to do. Her voice carried no accent he could identify, but there was something in her tone that suggested depths beyond her apparent age. She spoke with the careful precision of someone who had learned that words mattered, that careless speech could have consequences. Hawk had expected the usual response from a Marine showing off. Some mixture of pride and excitement, maybe some boasting about natural talent. Instead, Hannah's reaction was matter-of-fact, as if exceptional marksmanship was simply expected rather than extraordinary. Mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that? Hawk asked, genuinely curious. That kind of precision does not come from basic training. Hannah continued cleaning the bolt, her movements efficient and practiced. My godfather taught me to shoot when I was 8, she said without looking up. Started with a .22, worked my way up. He always said shooting was 90% mental, 10% technique. Your godfather sounds like he knew his business, Hawk replied. Military? For the first time, Hannah paused in her cleaning. A shadow crossed her face so brief that Hawk almost missed it, there and gone like a cloud across the sun. Something like that, she said quietly, then resumed her work. Hawk had interrogated enough people in his career to recognize deliberate vagueness when he heard it. There was more to Hannah's story than she was willing to share with a stranger, even one with his credentials. But he had also learned that the best operators often carried secrets, and pushing too hard too fast was rarely productive. Some doors opened only from the inside. Well, if you are ever interested in expanding your skill set, Naval Special Warfare is always looking for shooters with your talent, Hawk said, pulling a card from his pocket. We run some specialized programs that might interest you. Hannah took the card and glanced at it briefly before tucking it into her breast pocket. I appreciate that, Master Chief, but I am happy where I am. As Hawk walked away, he found himself troubled by the encounter in ways he could not immediately articulate. He had met thousands of shooters in his career, from fresh recruits to seasoned snipers with confirmed kills in multiple theaters. But something about Hannah Price did not fit the typical mold. Her shooting was too perfect, too controlled, too professional for someone who should have been learning rather than demonstrating mastery. That evening, Hawk found himself in his temporary office staring at Hannah's personnel file on his computer screen. What he found there was frustratingly routine. An exemplary Marine with excellent fitness reports, a clean disciplinary record, and shooting scores that were good but not exceptional. Nothing in her official records suggested the level of skill he had witnessed that morning. But Hawk had learned to read between the lines of military records. The gaps in Hannah's training history bothered him. The vague references to special assignments, the fact that someone with her obvious talents had not been selected for Marine Scout Sniper School, all of it pointed to a story that was not being told through official channels. Hannah Marie Price, born in San Diego, California, enlisted at age 22, mother deceased, father deceased. Next of kin listed as Colonel James Garrett, retired United States Marine Corps. Relationship, godfather. Hawk pulled up Garrett's service record, force recon, multiple combat deployments to Mogadishu, Beirut, the First Gulf War. Retired with full honors in 2003. A warrior's warrior, the kind of Marine who became legend. Hawk had heard stories about Garrett over the years, the way people in special operations circles heard stories about men who operated at the edge of human capability. Most of the stories involved impossible shots at impossible distances under impossible conditions. If Garrett had trained Hannah from childhood, it would explain her skills. But it did not explain why those skills were not reflected in her official training records. It did not explain the gaps in her service history, the 3 extended leaves she had taken over 4 years, each one marked simply as personal emergency with no additional details. Hawk closed the file and leaned back in his chair, troubled by questions he could not answer. In his experience, shooters like Hannah did not just appear fully formed. That level of skill required years of practice, professional instruction, and most importantly, real-world application under pressure. The question that would not leave him alone was simple. Where had Staff Sergeant Hannah Price really learned to shoot? And what was not she telling him about her past? 3 days passed before Hawk saw Hannah again. He spent those days settling into his temporary assignment at Camp Pendleton, evaluating the Marine Sniper Training Program, and making recommendations for integration with naval special warfare protocols. But his mind kept returning to the woman who shot like a seasoned operator despite having no official sniper training. On the fourth day, he found her at the range again, this time working with a group of junior Marines on basic marksmanship fundamentals. She moved among them with quiet authority, correcting grip and stance with the minimum words necessary, demonstrating proper breathing technique with the patience of a natural teacher. The young Marines listened with the attentiveness that came from recognizing genuine expertise. Hawk watched from a distance, noting the way Hannah positioned herself, the way she demonstrated rather than simply explaining. There was an old-school quality to her instruction, a focus on fundamentals that reminded him of the way SEALs had been trained in the 90s before technology began to replace repetition. When the training session ended and the Marines filed away, Hawk approached. Hannah was field stripping an M4, her hands moving with automatic precision. "Your students are lucky to have you," Hawk said. Hannah looked up and offered a small smile. "They are good kids, eager to learn. That makes teaching easy. You are a natural instructor. Ever think about making it official? Scout Sniper School instructor position?" The smile faded slightly. "I am happy where I am, Master Chief. Not everyone needs to be special operations." There was something in the way she said it, a flatness that suggested the words were rehearsed, a prepared response to a question she had heard before. Hawk recognized the tone. He had used it himself over the years when people asked about missions he could not discuss, experiences he could not share. He changed tactics. "Your godfather, Colonel Garrett. I knew him by reputation, hell of a Marine." Hannah's hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed their work. "He is," she said quietly. "How is he doing in retirement?" She paused again, longer this time. "He keeps busy, consulting work mostly, training programs for private security contractors." Hawk felt something click into place. Private security contractors, the kind of work that attracted former special operations personnel who were not quite ready to leave the life behind. The kind of work that operated in gray areas between official military operations and corporate security. The kind of work that could explain extended leaves and unexplained absences from a Marine Corps staff sergeant's service record. "Must be interesting work," Hawk said carefully. Hannah met his eyes, and for a moment he saw something flicker there, a wariness that had not been present before. "I would not know, Master Chief. I am just a Marine." She finished reassembling the M4 with practiced speed and stood, slinging the weapon over her shoulder. "If you will excuse me, I have a physical training session in 15 minutes. She walked away before Hawk could respond, her stride measured and professional. But he noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her right hand stayed near her sidearm out of habit rather than threat. Small tells but revealing. That night, Hawk made a phone call he had been avoiding. The number rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Walsh here." "Tom, it is Marcus Sullivan. I need a favor." Gunnery Sergeant Tom Walsh had been running background investigations for Marine Corps intelligence for 15 years and owed Hawk several favors from their joint operations in Afghanistan. The kind of favors that could not be called in through official channels. "SEAL boy," Walsh said, and Hawk could hear the smile in his voice. "What trouble are you stirring up now?" Hawk explained his interest in Hannah Price, being careful to frame it as routine vetting for potential special operations recruitment. Walsh promised to make some quiet inquiries and get back to him within a few days. In the meantime, Hawk would watch and wait and try to understand why a 25-year-old Marine Staff Sergeant could shoot like a Tier 1 operator. The answer came sooner than expected, but not from Walsh. The next morning, Hawk arrived at the range to find Hannah already there, working through a training evolution with live fire and move drills. She engaged targets at multiple distances, transitioning smoothly between shooting positions, her movement fluid and economical. Nothing about the drill was extraordinary by special operations standards, but everything about her execution was. What caught Hawk's attention was the way she handled stress. Most Marines, even good ones, showed visible signs of pressure during timed drills. Their breathing quickened. Their movements became slightly rushed. Small mistakes crept in at the edges. Hannah looked like she was taking a walk. When the drill ended, she cleared her weapon and turned to find Hawk watching from the observation tower. Their eyes met across 50 meters of range, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement that the pretense was becoming thin. Hawk climbed down from the tower and walked to meet her. Hannah waited, her stance relaxed but ready, the posture of someone comfortable with confrontation. "We need to talk," Hawk said quietly. "Somewhere private." Hannah studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face for something. Finally, she nodded. "There is a coffee shop off base. Meets the definition of somewhere private." They met 2 hours later at a small cafe in Oceanside, the kind of place where military personnel could blend in with civilians and have conversations that never appeared in official reports. Hawk arrived first and chose a corner booth with good sight lines to both entrances. Old habits. Hannah arrived exactly on time, dressed in civilian clothes that made her look even younger than her 25 years. Jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down instead of pulled back in regulation style. She slid into the booth across from him and waited, saying nothing. Hawk had planned this conversation carefully, but looking at her now, he found himself reconsidering his approach. There was something about Hannah that reminded him of his son, the same quiet intensity, the same sense of carrying weight that should not belong to someone so young. "How much do you know?" Hannah asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Enough to know that Staff Sergeant Hannah Price is not the whole story," Hawk replied. "Enough to wonder why someone with your skills is not in the scout sniper pipeline. Enough to be curious about those extended leaves you have taken." Hannah closed her eyes briefly, and Hawk saw her shoulders drop slightly, as if she was releasing a burden she had been carrying for too long. When she opened her eyes again, there was something different in her expression, a mixture of relief and resignation. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "The truth," Hawk said. "Whatever you are willing to share." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her coffee cup as if it held answers she could not find anywhere else. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of confession. "My godfather was not just some hunting enthusiast," she began. "Colonel James Garrett, Force Recon, served in Mogadishu, Beirut, the First Gulf War, and half a dozen other conflicts that never made the news. When my parents died in a car accident when I was 8, he took me in." Hawk nodded, understanding that this was likely the first time Hannah had told this story to anyone in her military career. Colonel Garrett did not know how to raise a little girl the normal way, when Hannah continued. What he knew was military training, discipline, and marksmanship. By the time I was 12, I could outshoot most adults. By 16, I was competing in precision rifle competitions across the country. "That explains the skills," Hawk said, "but not the gaps in your service record." Hannah took a sip of her coffee, buying time to organize her thoughts. "One of the instructors at a competition noticed my abilities. He approached me with an opportunity, specialized training that was not available through normal channels. The kind of training that could lead to interesting work. Private military contractor work," Hawk said. It was not a question. Hannah met his eyes. "Yes." Hawk sat back, processing this information. "How old were you?" 17 when the training started, 21 when I started taking contracts. "And the Marines?" "Cover," Hannah said simply. "A way to maintain legitimate credentials while working other jobs. The extended leaves were not for personal emergencies. They were for operations." "What kind of operations?" Hawk asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Hannah's expression hardened slightly, her eyes taking on that distant look he had noticed at the range. High-value targets that regular military could not touch due to political considerations. Threat actors operating from locations where official military action would create diplomatic incidents. The kind of work that happens in the shadows and never sees daylight. Hawk felt a chill run down his spine. "How many?" Hannah hesitated, then answered with brutal honesty. 9 confirmed kills over 4 years, all supposedly verified threats, all sanctioned by people I trusted. The weight of that confession hung between them like smoke. 9 kills, at 25 years old, operating in the shadows without official sanction or support. Hawk had known operators with similar histories, but they were usually twice Hannah's age and hardened by decades of war. "The 3,200-meter shot," Hawk said quietly. "That was not just a rumor, was it?" Hannah looked up sharply, surprise replacing the weariness in her eyes. "How could you possibly know about that?" "That operation was completely black. Word travels in the special operations community," Hawk replied. "Even when it is not supposed to, a shot like that becomes legend." Hannah was quiet for so long that Hawk began to wonder if she would continue. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that spoke of memories she wished she could forget. "It was my 3rd contract. Taliban commander named Hassan Mahmoud, date on coordinating attacks from a compound in the mountains near the Pakistani border. Intelligence indicated he was planning something significant. The compound was in a location where conventional military action was impossible. Too close to the border, too many civilians, too politically sensitive. Hawk leaned forward slightly, understanding that he was about to hear details of an operation that officially never happened. I spent 6 days moving into position, Hannah continued. The shot had to be taken from a ridge across a valley to avoid civilian casualties and provide a clear escape route. The distance was extreme, over 3 kilometers. The environmental conditions were challenging. High altitude, variable winds, temperature changes throughout the day. 3,247 meters, Hawk said softly. That is over 2 miles. 2.01 miles exactly, Hannah confirmed. I had to account for the Coriolis effect at that distance. The bullet flight time was over 4 seconds. Mahmoud moved from his usual position 3 times before I had the shot I needed. Hawk tried to imagine the level of skill and patience required for such a shot. Most military snipers considered anything over 1,000 meters to be an extremely long-range engagement. Hannah was describing something that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. When I took the shot, Hannah said, her voice distant, I was not even sure I could see the target clearly enough through the scope. The heat shimmer and atmospheric conditions made positive identification difficult. But intelligence confirmed that Mahmoud was scheduled to be in that specific location at that specific time. And you hit him, Hawk said. Hannah nodded slowly. 1 shot, clean kill. The operation was successful, but the psychological impact was significant. Taking a life from that distance, under those conditions, in service of a cause that I could never officially acknowledge, it changes you. Hawk understood the weight she was carrying. He had seen the same burden in other operators who had been required to make life and death decisions in the shadows, without recognition or official support. That is why you want to stay in the regular Marines, Hawk said, understanding. You are tired of the black operations. I am tired of being invisible, Hannah replied, using language that carried its own weight. I want to serve my country in light, not the shadows. I want to train other Marines, pass on my skills in an official capacity. I want my service to mean something that I can talk about when I am old. Hawk sat back in the booth, processing everything Hannah had told him. Her story explained not just her exceptional marksmanship skills, but also her maturity, her tactical awareness, and the shadows he had seen in her eyes. She was a combat veteran with kills in multiple theaters, disguised as a regular Marine with no combat experience. The question now, Hawk said carefully, is what happens next? You have told me things that could end your military career if they became official knowledge. Hannah met his eyes directly for the first time since beginning her story. I told you because I trust you and because I think you understand what it means to serve in the shadows. But I am done with that life, Master Chief. I want to be Hannah Price, Marine instructor, not some ghost operating in the dark. Hawk nodded slowly, understanding the trust she had placed in him and the responsibility that came with her confession. I respect that choice, but your skills are too valuable to waste on routine instruction. There might be other ways to serve that do not require you to disappear into the shadows. They talked for another hour, discussing possibilities and paths forward, 2 warriors trying to navigate the complicated terrain between official duty and unofficial service. When they finally parted ways, Hawk felt the weight of new responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had been given a secret, and with secrets came obligations. Over the next week, Hawk found himself unable to shake the conversation with Hannah from his mind. He went through the motions of his temporary assignment, evaluating training programs and writing reports, but his thoughts kept returning to the young woman who had killed 9 people by age 25 and now wanted nothing more than to serve in the light. The phone call from Walsh came on a Thursday evening. Your Marine is interesting, Marcus, Walsh began without preamble. Officially, everything is clean. Unofficially, there are some curiosities. Such as, Hawk asked, those extended leaves she took. They do not align with any family emergencies or personal issues in her record. And here is the kicker. During her second leave, Customs has her entering Canada, but there is no corresponding exit record for over a month. Hawk felt his pulse quicken. Canada? It gets better, Walsh continued. I have a contact in Canadian immigration who owes me a favor. Turns out your Hannah Price has been crossing the border regularly since she was 16. Always the same destination, a small town in Alberta called High Prairie. "What is in High Prairie?" Hawk asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Mostly nothing," Walsh replied. "It is ranching country. Population maybe 3,000. But here is what is interesting. It is also home to one of the most elite private military training facilities in North America, a place called Northern Tactical Solutions." Hawk had heard whispers about Northern Tactical Solutions during his years in special operations. It was supposedly where wealthy individuals, private military contractors, and certain government agencies sent people for training that was too sensitive or too specialized for official military programs. The kind of place that did not advertise and did not keep public records. "You think she was training there?" Hawk asked. "I think she was doing something there," Walsh replied. "But here is where it gets really interesting. I reached out to a buddy who works security contracting in the Middle East. He says there has been talk on the circuit about a sniper working in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border region. Female, extremely skilled, taking contracts that the regular military would not touch. Goes by the call sign Phantom." Hawk felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm evening. "You think it is her?" "I think your Marine Staff Sergeant has been leading a double life," Walsh said. "The timing of her leaves corresponds exactly with some major operations that this Phantom character was supposedly involved in. Operations that required the kind of shooting skills you witnessed." After hanging up, Hawk sat in his office staring at Hannah's official photograph on his computer screen. The young woman in the picture looked like any other Marine. Professional, competent, but unremarkable. But Hawk now suspected he was looking at someone who had been living two lives, maintaining the facade of a regular service member while secretly operating as one of the world's most skilled snipers. The ethical implications troubled him deeply. If Hannah was indeed working as a private military contractor during her leaves, she was potentially violating military regulations and possibly federal law. But the tactical implications fascinated him. If even half of what Walsh had suggested was true, Hannah possessed skills that would be invaluable to special operations forces. He spent that night wrestling with competing obligations. His duty to report violations of military regulations, his respect for Hannah's desire to serve legitimately, his understanding of the gray areas where warriors sometimes operated when official channels failed to address real threats. By morning, he had made a decision. He would confront Hannah directly but carefully. If she was indeed the sniper known as Phantom, she would be extremely dangerous if she felt threatened or exposed. He would need to approach her in a way that demonstrated he could be trusted with her secret, while making it clear that he knew more than she might be comfortable with. That afternoon, Hawk found Hannah in the armory, meticulously cleaning weapons after the day's training. The methodical way she disassembled and cleaned each component spoke to someone who understood that weapon maintenance was literally a matter of life and death. "Staff Sergeant Price," Hawk said quietly, ensuring they were alone, "I would like to speak with you privately." Hannah looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, and Hawk saw a flash of weariness in her blue eyes before her expression became neutral. "Of course, Master Chief. How can I help you?" "I have been doing some research since our conversation the other day," Hawk began carefully. "Your shooting skills are exceptional, the kind that usually comes from specialized training and real-world application." Hannah continued cleaning the weapon, but Hawk noticed her movements had become more deliberate, more controlled. "I told you, Master Chief, my godfather taught me well." "I am sure he did," Hawk replied, "but I am curious about your travels to Canada, specifically to a town called High Prairie in Alberta." Hannah's hands stopped moving entirely. For several seconds, the armory was completely silent, except for the distant sound of Marines training outside. When Hannah finally looked up, her eyes held a hardness that had not been there before. "I think we need to have a longer conversation, Master Chief," she said quietly, "but not here." They agreed to meet that evening at a different location, somewhere even more private than the coffee shop. Hannah suggested a hiking trail in the hills east of base, a place where they could walk and talk without worry of surveillance or eavesdropping. Hawk arrived first, parking his truck at the trailhead and beginning the walk up into the scrub-covered hills. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, turning the Pacific Ocean in the distance into a sheet of hammered gold. Hannah appeared 15 minutes later, dressed in hiking clothes, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She fell into step beside him without a word, and they walked in silence for nearly half a mile before she spoke. "How much do you know?" Hannah asked. "Enough to know that Phantom is not just a rumor," Hawk replied. "Enough to know that Northern Tactical Solutions is where you really learn to shoot. Enough to wonder what else you have not told me." Hannah stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. And what are you going to do with that information, Master Chief? That depends on what you tell me now, Hawk said. The truth, Hannah. All of it. They stood there on the trail as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars began to appear overhead. Two warriors at a crossroads, both understanding that the next word spoken would determine everything that came after. Hannah took a deep breath and began to speak. My godfather, James Garrett, did not just train me to shoot, she said. He trained me to be a weapon. From the time I was 8 years old, everything in my life was about becoming the perfect operator. By 16, I was better than most professionals. By 18, Northern Tactical Solutions recruited me. They said I had a gift. They said I could serve my country in ways that regular military could not. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The training at Northern Tactical was unlike anything the military offers. Former special operations from a dozen different countries. SEALs, SAS, Spetsnaz, Mossad. They taught me things that most Tier 1 operators never see. Advanced tradecraft, surveillance, infiltration, counter-surveillance. Languages, cultural awareness. How to disappear and reappear where needed. And the contracts? Hawk asked gently. Hannah started walking again, and Hawk fell into step beside her. The first one came when I was 21, a terrorist financier in Pakistan. The second was an arms dealer in Syria. They were sold to me as serving American interests, stopping threats that official channels could not touch. I believed them. But now you do not, Hawk said. Now I do not know what to believe, Hannah replied. After our conversation at the coffee shop, I started asking questions, digging into the backgrounds of the targets I was sent to eliminate. Some of them were exactly what I was told, genuine threats. But others, she trailed off, shaking her head. Others I am not so sure about. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound their boots on the trail and the distant howl of coyotes in the hills. My godfather always said that in war, there are no clean hands, Hannah continued. That serving your country sometimes means doing things that cannot be acknowledged. That the burden of civilization falls on those willing to carry it in the shadows. I believed him. He was the only family I had, the only person who cared about me after my parents died. But you do not believe him anymore, Hawk said. I do not know what I believe, Hannah said, and there was a brittleness in her voice that spoke of fracturing faith. All I know is that I am tired of killing people I cannot see clearly, for reasons I cannot verify, in service of goals I cannot understand. I just want to serve honestly, openly, in the light. They had reached a rocky outcrop that overlooked the ocean, and they sat down on the still warm stone, watching the last light fade from the western sky. I understand, Hawk said finally. More than you know. For the first time, Hannah turned to look at him directly. Do you, Master Chief? Do you really understand what it is like to pull a trigger from 2 miles away and wonder if the person you just killed deserved to die? To carry the weight of 9 lives without knowing if any of them mattered? Hawk was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with the careful honesty that the moment demanded. My son was killed in Iraq 10 years ago. IED outside Fallujah. He was 24 years old, a lieutenant in the Marine Corps, leading his platoon on patrol. I was stateside, going through a divorce, drinking too much, failing as a father even before he died. When they told me he was gone, I realized I had been so focused on being a warrior that I had forgotten to be a dad. Hannah said nothing, but her expression softened slightly. So yes, Hawk continued, I understand carrying weight. I understand wondering if the choices you made were the right ones. I understand wanting to serve in a way that matters. That means something beyond the shadow operations and the classified reports that no one will ever read. That is why I am here. That is why I am listening instead of reporting. They sat in silence as the stars grew brighter overhead. Two people carrying burdens too heavy to set down, but too painful to carry alone. Finally, Hannah spoke. What happens now? Now we figure out if there is a path forward, Hawk said. A way for you to use your skills legitimately. A way to serve in the light, like you want. And if there is not, then we create one, Hawk replied. But first I need you to tell me everything. The operations, the targets, the handlers. Everything you know about who has been running you and why. Hannah nodded slowly. Okay, but not tonight. Tonight I just want to sit here and remember what it feels like to be honest with someone. They sat together on the outcrop until the moon rose. Two warriors finding something like peace in the simple act of shared silence. When Hawk finally returned to his quarters that night, he found an email waiting for him. No sender address, no subject line, just a message and an encrypted file attachment. The message read, Master Chief Sullivan, if you are interested in the truth about Staff Sergeant Price and her godfather, decrypt this file. Password is Derek Price. Good luck. Hawk stared at the screen, his mind racing. Derek Price. Hannah had said her father's name was Derek, that he had died in a car accident when she was 8. But why would someone use his name as a password? And who had sent this email? He spent the next hour working through the encryption, using tools and techniques he had learned over decades of intelligence work. When the file finally opened, what he found made his blood run cold. It was a classified after-action report from a Marine Force recon operation in Afghanistan, dated March 17, 2009. The mission was listed as Objective Sandstorm. The unit commander was Colonel James Garrett, and there, in the casualty section, was a name that made everything fall into place. Captain Derek Price, killed in action. Cause of death, gunshot wound to the back. Circumstances, under investigation. Hawk clicked through the attached documents, his hands trembling slightly as the pieces assembled themselves into a picture he did not want to see. Derek Price had filed a war crimes report 24 hours before his death. The report accused his unit commander of ordering the execution of unarmed civilians during a village clearing operation. The unit commander named in the report was James Garrett, and in the margin of the report, in handwriting that Hawk recognized from decades of reading official documents, was a note in Derek Price's hand, if anything happens to me, protect my daughter. JG cannot be trusted. Hawk sat back in his chair, feeling like he had been punched in the gut. Hannah's godfather had not just trained her to be a weapon. He had killed her father to cover up war crimes, then raised his victim's daughter as his own, shaping her into the kind of operator who could kill without question, who could serve in the shadows without asking why. The revelation was so monstrous that Hawk's first instinct was disbelief. But the documents were real, the signatures authentic, the timeline undeniable. James Garrett had murdered Derek Price, and Hannah had no idea she had been living with her father's killer for 18 years. Hawk's hands shook as he reached for his phone, then stopped. This was not the kind of information you delivered over the phone. This was not the kind of truth you revealed without careful thought about the consequences. Because once Hannah knew what Hawk now knew, there would be no going back. The foundation of her entire life would crack and shatter, and he had no idea what would rise from the rubble. He stared at the screen for a long time, wrestling with the terrible weight of knowledge, understanding that he had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The old shepherd, it turned out, was a wolf, and Hannah Price, the woman who wanted nothing more than to serve in the light, was about to learn that she had been raised in the deepest darkness imaginable. Hawk closed his laptop and sat in the silence of his quarters, feeling every one of his 58 years pressing down on his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would have to tell Hannah the truth. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for just a few more hours, he would let her have peace. Because tomorrow, when the truth came out, peace would be the first casualty. The first, but certainly not the last. The sun had not yet risen when Hawk finally fell into an uneasy sleep, his laptop still glowing on the desk beside him. Derek Price's after-action report frozen on the screen like an accusation. He dreamed of his son Michael, as he always did when faced with impossible choices. In the dream, Michael was 24 again, standing in the doorway of Hawk's apartment in his marine dress blues, smiling the way he used to smile before Iraq changed him. But when Hawk reached out to embrace his son, Michael stepped back and spoke with Derek Price's voice. Tell her the truth. She deserves to know who raised her. Hawk woke with a start, his heart hammering against his ribs, the taste of old guilt bitter in his mouth. The clock read 5:30 in the morning. He had slept for less than 3 hours, and the weight of what he had learned pressed down on him like a physical force. Colonel James Garrett had murdered Captain Derek Price to cover up war crimes. Then he had taken Derek's 8-year-old daughter and spent 18 years molding her into a weapon, training her to kill without question, shaping her into the kind of operator who could eliminate targets from impossible distances without asking why. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The calculation required to look a dead man's daughter in the eyes every day and pretend to be her savior was monstrous. Hawk showered and dressed in the mechanical way of someone running on muscle memory rather than conscious thought. He needed to tell Hannah. She had a right to know. But the question that tormented him was when and how. This was not the kind of information you delivered casually. This was not the kind of truth you revealed without understanding that it would shatter the foundation of someone's entire existence. He spent the morning at the base gym, working through his anxiety with weights and the heavy bag, punishing his 58-year-old body the way he had always punished himself when faced with problems that could not be solved with violence. The other SEALs and Marines gave him space, recognizing the look of a man wrestling with demons. By the time he showered and changed, his phone showed 3 missed calls from Hannah. No voicemails, just the calls themselves, which somehow felt more urgent than any message could have been. He called her back. She answered on the first ring. "Master Chief, I need to see you now." Her voice carried an edge he had not heard before, something sharp and brittle that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. "Where?" Hawk asked. "The trails. Same place as last night. 1 hour." She hung up before he could respond. Hawk drove to the trailhead with the encrypted file on a thumb drive in his pocket and a growing sense of dread in his gut. Whatever had prompted Hannah's urgency, he suspected it was connected to the truth he had uncovered. The universe had a way of forcing revelations, whether you were ready for them or not. Hannah was already at the overlook when he arrived, standing at the edge of the rocky outcrop they had sat on the night before. She did not turn when she heard his boots on the trail, just kept staring out at the ocean as if the answers she needed might be written on the surface of the water. "You found something," Hawk said. It was not a question. Hannah turned to face him, and what Hawk saw in her eyes made his chest tighten. She looked like someone who had stared into an abyss and found it staring back. Her face was pale, her jaw set in a rigid line, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "I went to Uncle James's house last night," Hannah said, her voice carefully controlled. "After our conversation, I could not stop thinking about the things you asked. The questions about Canada, about my training, about where I really learned to shoot. So I went to his house. He keeps a study there full of memorabilia from his career. I have been in that room 1,000 times. But last night you looked with different eyes," Hawk said quietly. Hannah nodded. "There is a drawer in his desk, locked. I never thought much about it before. Every military man has things he keeps private. But last night I picked the lock." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. When she unwrapped it, Hawk saw 2 dog tags on a chain, the metal dulled with age. Hannah held them up, and even from several feet away, Hawk could read the name stamped into the metal. "Price, Derek J." "My father's dog tags," Hannah said, and her voice finally cracked. "They were supposed to give these to me when he died. That is protocol. Next of kin receives the tags. But they told me his tags were lost in the incident, burned beyond recognition, like his body supposedly was." Hawk felt his heart breaking for her, but he said nothing. This was her story to tell, her truth to reveal. "There was more in the drawer," Hannah continued. "A photograph, my father and James Garrett, taken in Afghanistan. The date stamp says March 15th, 2009, 2 days before my father died." She pulled out her phone and showed Hawk the image she had photographed. 2 men in Marine combat uniforms standing in front of a mud brick compound. Derek Price looked young and vital, but his face was twisted in anger, his body language radiating barely controlled fury. James Garrett stood beside him, and the expression on his face was one Hawk recognized from decades of reading people in high-stress situations. Guilt, shame, and underneath it all, calculation. "There was a note too," Hannah said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "In my father's handwriting. It said, 'James, I cannot cover for you anymore. Those were civilians. I am reporting this.'" She looked up at Hawk with eyes that held a terrible knowledge. "He killed him. My godfather killed my father. Did not he?" Hawk pulled the thumb drive from his pocket and held it up. "I was going to tell you today. I received an encrypted file last night. After action report from a Marine Force recon operation in Afghanistan. March 17th, 2009. Mission designation, Objective Sandstorm." "Tell me," Hannah said. So Hawk told her. He told her about the village that was destroyed, the 23 civilians who died, the report Derek Price filed accusing his commanding officer of ordering executions of unarmed men, women, and children. He told her about the timeline, how Derek filed the report on March 16th and died on March 17th. He told her that the commanding officer accused of war crimes was Colonel James Garrett. When he finished, Hannah turned away from him and stared out at the ocean for a long time. The sun had risen fully now, turning the water into a field of dancing light, beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. He took me in, Hannah finally said, her voice hollow. He raised me. He trained me. He told me stories about my father, about how brave he was, how honorable. He said my father died protecting his team. He said my father was a hero. She laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it, and all of it was a lie. My father did not die protecting anyone. He died because he refused to cover up a massacre. He died because he had a conscience. And the man who killed him spent 18 years pretending to honor his memory. Hawk moved to stand beside her, close enough to offer presence but not touch. Sometimes the only thing you could offer someone was witness to their pain. Why would he do it? Hannah asked. And now there were tears streaming down her face. Why take me in? Why train me? Why spend all those years turning me into what I am? Hawk had been thinking about this question since he read the file. Guilt, maybe. A twisted sense of obligation to the man he killed. Or maybe he saw you as a way to redeem himself. If he could create the perfect warrior from Derek's daughter, maybe he could prove that his vision of warfare was right and your father's was wrong. Hannah shook her head slowly. You are giving him too much credit. There is a simpler explanation. What is that? Control. He killed my father because my father threatened his power, his authority, his ability to operate without oversight. Then he took my father's daughter and shaped her into a weapon that would never question orders, never report war crimes, never choose conscience over loyalty. He did not train me out of love or guilt or redemption. He trained me to be the opposite of my father, to be proof that his way was right. The clarity of her analysis was chilling. Hannah had gone from confusion to understanding with terrifying speed, and what she understood was not just what Garrett had done, but why. She saw the pattern beneath the pretense, the calculation behind the care. What are you going to do? Hawk asked. Hannah wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand, and when she looked at Hawk, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by something harder and colder. I am going to confront him. I am going to make him admit what he did, and then I am going to decide whether the man who killed my father deserves to live. The casual way she spoke about potentially killing Garrett should have alarmed Hawk, but he understood. He had felt the same cold rage when he learned the truth about operations that had cost good men their lives for corrupt purposes. The desire for justice bled easily into the desire for vengeance, and the line between the two was often invisible until you had already crossed it. Be careful, Hawk said. Garrett is not just some retired Marine. He has resources, connections, and decades of experience in covert operations. If he thinks you are a threat, he will not hesitate to eliminate you. Let him try, Hannah said, and there was steel in her voice. I am what he made me. If he wants to test his creation, I am ready. They stood together on the overlook as the morning deepened. Two warriors contemplating violence against someone who wore the mask of family but concealed the face of an enemy. Finally, Hannah turned to leave, but Hawk caught her arm gently. Do not do this alone. Whatever you decide, whatever you need, I am with you. Your father was a Marine who stood up for what was right, even though it cost him everything. The least I can do is stand with his daughter. Hannah looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression softened slightly. Thank you, Master Chief. That means more than you know. She walked away down the trail, leaving Hawk alone with the sound of the waves and the weight of promises he hoped he could keep. What Hawk did not know, what neither of them could have known, was that 300 miles away, Colonel James Garrett was sitting in his ranch office in Arizona, staring at a computer screen that showed live surveillance footage of their conversation on the overlook. The audio quality was poor, but the body language told him everything he needed to know. Hannah knew, and Sullivan had helped her figure it out. Garrett leaned back in his leather chair and made a decision that came as easily as breathing. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory, a number that connected to a man whose services were expensive, but whose results were guaranteed. The call was answered on the second ring. A voice speaking English with a Russian accent, flat and professional. Da. Frost, I have a problem that needs your particular expertise. The voice on the other end was silent for a moment, then replied with the careful neutrality of a professional assessing a job. Define the problem. A Navy SEAL named Robert Sullivan. Master Chief, currently assigned to Camp Pendleton. He has been asking questions about old operations. Questions that could create complications. Complications for you or complications for mutual interest? For me, Garrett admitted. But if you are concerned about broader implications, this SEAL has also been investigating Northern Tactical Solutions. He knows about the training programs, the contractor pipeline, the entire network. There was another pause. That is indeed problematic. What level of response are you authorizing? Permanent solution, quietly. Make it look like an accident or a random crime. I do not want any attention on this. And the woman? Sullivan has been meeting with a Marine, yes? Staff Sergeant Price? Garrett felt something twist in his chest at the mention of Hannah, but his voice remained steady. The woman is not your concern. I will handle her separately. Are you certain? If Sullivan has shared information with her, she becomes a security risk. I said I will handle her, Garrett replied, his voice taking on an edge. She is off limits. Do we understand each other? Understood, Frost replied. Sullivan only. When do you need this done? Within 48 hours. He is becoming more active in his investigation. The longer we wait, the more people he might talk to. I am already in California. I can have a team in position by tonight. What is your budget? Name your price. 200,000. Half now, half on confirmation. Done. I will transfer the first payment within the hour. Send me confirmation when it is completed. Garrett ended the call and sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the surveillance screen that still showed the empty overlook where Hannah and Sullivan had stood. He had made countless difficult decisions in his career, had ordered operations that resulted in deaths both necessary and unfortunate. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that his other work never had. Sullivan was a threat that had to be eliminated. That was simple operational logic. But Hannah, the daughter he had raised and trained and shaped into something extraordinary, she was a different kind of problem. He could not kill her, would not kill her, even though his survival might depend on it. He would have to convince her, make her understand that what he had done to Derek was necessary, that weak men like Herfurth would have destroyed the very system that kept America safe. Hannah was smart. She was rational. Once she got past the initial emotional response, she would see the logic of it. At least that was what Garrett told himself as he authorized the transfer of $100,000 to an offshore account and set in motion the machinery that would end Robert Sullivan's life. That evening, Hawk left Camp Pendleton later than usual, delayed by a meeting with the training command about integration protocols. The sun had already set when he finally walked to his truck in the parking lot, his mind still churning through the revelations of the day and the implications of what Hannah might do next. He was so focused on his thoughts that he almost missed the subtle wrongness of the parking lot. Almost. But 32 years as a SEAL had trained him to notice things that were out of place, and his instincts screamed at him a fraction of a second before the first shot cracked through the evening air. Hawk dropped and rolled as the bullet sparked off the concrete where he had been standing. Training took over before conscious thought could interfere. He came up with his sidearm drawn, putting the bulk of his truck between himself and the shooter's position. 3 more shots rang out, 2 hitting the truck and 1 shattering the driver's side window. The shots came from 3 different positions, which meant multiple shooters, which meant professional hit team rather than random violence. Hawk's mind cataloged details with the automatic efficiency of decades of combat experience. Sound signatures suggested suppressed 9mm rounds. Spacing of shooters indicated coordinated assault. Timing suggested they had been waiting for him, which meant surveillance and planning. This was not spontaneous. This was professional. He fired twice at the muzzle flash from his 10 o'clock position, then moved before return fire could find him. Military training emphasized cover and movement, the constant dance that kept you alive in a gunfight. Standing still meant dying. A figure moved between parked cars at his 2 o'clock, and Hawk put 2 rounds center mass. The figure went down hard and did not get up. 1 down, at least 2 more to go. Shots came from his 6 o'clock now, a 3rd shooter trying to flank him. Hawk pivoted and engaged, his muscle memory taking over the mechanics of shooting, while his tactical brain calculated angles and positions and probabilities. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he had fought in worse situations and survived. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes but felt like hours. Hawk moved through the parking lot like a ghost, using vehicles for cover, never staying in one position long enough to be pinned down. He took a round through his left shoulder that felt like being hit with a baseball bat, the impact spinning him halfway around and nearly dropping him to his knees. But he stayed up and kept moving, kept shooting, kept fighting with the grim determination of someone who had survived too much to die in a parking lot. When the shooting finally stopped, 3 bodies lay scattered across the asphalt. Hawk leaned against a concrete pillar, his left arm hanging useless at his side, blood soaking through his shirt. His breathing came in ragged gasps, and the adrenaline that had sustained him through the fight was beginning to fade, leaving behind pain and the cold realization of how close he had come to death. He heard footsteps approaching and raised his sidearm with his right hand, but the figure that appeared was not another attacker. It was Hannah, running across the parking lot with her own weapon drawn, her face pale in the overhead lights. "Jesus, Hawk," she said, holstering her weapon and moving to support him. "What happened?" "Professional hit team," Hawk managed through gritted teeth. 3 shooters, coordinated assault, Garrett sent them. Hannah helped him sit down, already pulling out her phone to call for help. But Hawk caught her wrist with his good hand. "No ambulance, no police. Not yet. We need to secure the scene first. Check the bodies." Hannah hesitated, then nodded. She moved to the nearest body, a man in dark civilian clothes with a suppressed Glock still in his hand. She checked for identification and found nothing. No wallet, no phone, no tags. Professional protocol for deniable operations. The second body was the same, clean, sanitized, anonymous. But the third shooter, the one Hawk had wounded rather than killed, was still breathing. Hannah knelt beside him and saw he had maybe minutes left. The bullet had caught him in the chest, and blood was bubbling from his lips with each labored breath. She leaned close. "Who sent you?" The dying man's eyes focused on her with difficulty. His lips moved, forming words that came out as barely more than a whisper. "Garrett," he said, blood flecking his mouth. "Sends regards." Then his eyes went blank and the breathing stopped. Hannah stood slowly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She looked at Hawk, who was watching her with a detached awareness of someone dealing with significant blood loss. "He tried to kill you," Hannah said, and her voice was utterly flat. "My godfather tried to murder you." Hawk nodded, "Which means he knows we know, which means he sees us as threats, which means this is not over." Hannah pulled out her phone again, but this time when she dialed, it was not for emergency services. She called someone else, someone Hawk did not recognize. The conversation was brief and cryptic, coordinates and confirmation codes that suggested pre-established protocols. When she hung up, she looked at Hawk with determination. "I have people who can clean this up, people who owe me favors from my contractor days. They will handle the bodies, scrub the scene, make sure no questions get asked. But we need to get you medical attention." "Your people," Hawk said, fighting to stay conscious. "Can they be trusted?" "With my life," Hannah replied. "They have been before." 20 minutes later, a van arrived with 3 men who moved with military precision. They worked quickly and efficiently, loading the bodies, photographing the scene, collecting brass. Within an hour, it was as if the gunfight had never happened. Hannah got Hawk into her personal vehicle and drove to a private clinic in San Diego, the kind of place that catered to people who could not or would not use official medical facilities. The doctor who treated Hawk's shoulder wound asked no questions and provided no paperwork. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing bone and major blood vessels by millimeters. "Lucky," the doctor said. "Half an inch to the right and you would have bled out before you made it here." Luck had nothing to do with it, Hawk thought but did not say. He had moved the instant his instinct screamed, and that fraction of a second had been the difference between a shoulder wound and a sucking chest wound. But he was getting too old for this kind of luck. 58 was past the age where you should be dodging bullets in parking lots. Hannah sat with him while the doctor worked, her face an unreadable mask. When they were finally alone in the recovery room, Hawk on painkillers that made the world soft around the edges, she spoke. "He is going to come after us with everything he has. You understand that, right? This was just the opening move. Garrett does not do anything halfway." "I know," Hawk said, his words slightly slurred from the medication, "which means we cannot stay defensive. We need to go on the offensive. Force him to react instead of giving him time to plan." "What are you suggesting?" Hawk tried to sit up, failed, settled for turning his head to look at her directly. "We expose him, publicly. The war crimes, the murder of your father, the illegal contractor operations. We take away his ability to operate in the shadows by dragging everything into the light." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. "That would destroy him. Completely. No coming back from that kind of exposure." "Good," Hawk said. He tried to kill me tonight. He murdered your father. He has been running illegal operations for years. He deserves to be destroyed. But Hannah shook her head slowly. It is not that simple. Garrett has protection. People in government, in military command, in the intelligence community. People who benefit from the work he does, who have their own reasons to keep his secrets buried. If we try to expose him through official channels, we will get shut down. Classified, national security concerns, all the usual mechanisms they use to protect assets who know too much. Then what do you suggest? Hawk asked. We do what you said, but not through military channels. We go to the press, investigative journalists who cannot be silenced or intimidated. We give them everything. Documents, photographs, testimony. Make it too big to bury. That could blow back on you, Hawk warned. Your contractor work, the kills you made, all of it will come out. I know, Hannah said quietly, but maybe that is what needs to happen. Maybe it is time for me to face what I have done, own it, accept the consequences. Hawk studied her through the pleasant haze of painkillers and saw something in her expression that made him think of his son. Michael had looked like that before his last deployment, that mixture of resolve and resignation, the look of someone who had made peace with whatever came next. Okay, Hawk said, we do it your way, but we do it smart. We need insurance. Dead man switches. Multiple copies of the evidence in multiple locations. We need to make sure that if Garrett takes us out, the truth still gets revealed. Hannah nodded. I can handle that. I still have contacts from my contractor days. People who specialize in exactly this kind of contingency planning. Do it, Hawk said, feeling consciousness starting to slip away as the medication pulled him towards sleep. And Hannah, he added, fighting to get the words out. I am sorry about your father, about what Garrett took from you. If I had known him, if I had been there, maybe things would have been different. Hannah reached out and took his hand, her grip warm and solid. You are here now. That is what matters. Hawk wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she reminded him of his son, that helping her felt like a chance at redemption for all the ways he had failed Michael. But the medication won, pulling him down into darkness before the words could form. Hannah sat with him until his breathing deepened into sleep, then stood and walked to the window. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long time before finally making the call she had been dreading. It rang 4 times before the familiar voice answered. Hannah, sweetheart, I was hoping you would call. Colonel Garrett's voice was warm and familiar, the same voice that had told her bedtime stories and taught her to shoot and shaped her entire understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. Even now, knowing what she knew, part of her wanted to believe it had all been real, that the love had been genuine even if everything else was a lie. We need to talk, Uncle James. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Garrett spoke again, his voice had changed slightly, become more careful. Yes, I think we do. I heard about the incident at Camp Pendleton tonight. Terrible thing. Random violence is becoming such a problem in this country. It was not random, Hannah said, her voice flat. You sent them. You tried to kill Master Chief Sullivan. Another pause, longer this time. Hannah, I do not know what Sullivan has been telling you, but you need to understand that he is not what he seems. He has been investigating things that he has no business investigating, asking questions that could compromise ongoing operations and put lives at risk. Stop, Hannah said, and there was steel in her voice now. Stop lying to me. I know what you did. I found my father's dog tags. I saw the photograph. I read his note. I know about Objective Sandstorm. I know about the civilians you murdered. I know that my father tried to report you and you killed him for it. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Hannah began to wonder if Garrett had hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different again, colder and harder, the voice of a man who had made the calculation that pretense was no longer useful. Come home, Hannah. We need to have this conversation face to face, not over the phone. So you can kill me too? I would never hurt you, Garrett said, and there was something almost like pain in his voice. You are Derek's daughter. You are all I have left of him. You murdered him. Hannah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay controlled. You shot him in the back and then spent 18 years lying to me about it. I did what was necessary. Garrett's voice rose to match hers, the careful control finally cracking. Your father was going to destroy everything we had built. He was going to send good Marines to prison for doing their jobs. He chose the enemy over his own people. They were civilians, unarmed men and women and children. They were enemy combatants hiding among civilians. In war, there is no such thing as innocence. Everyone chooses a side. Hannah felt something break inside her, the last fragile hope that maybe there was an explanation, a justification, something that would make it make sense, but there was nothing. Just a man who had committed murder and convinced himself it was righteousness. My father chose honor, Hannah said quietly. He chose to do the right thing even though it cost him everything. And you killed him for it. Then you took his daughter and tried to turn her into the opposite of everything he stood for. I made you strong, Garrett said. I gave you purpose, discipline, skills that 99% of the population will never have. I honored your father by making you better than he ever was. You made me a weapon. You made me a killer. You made me into something my father would have been ashamed of. Your father was weak. Garrett's voice was raw now, all pretense of control gone. He did not understand what it takes to win. He did not understand that sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to keep them clean. I protected you from that weakness. I made you into a warrior who could do what needed to be done. And what did I need to do, Uncle James? Who did I really kill for you? Were they all threats, or were some of them just people who asked the wrong questions, like my father did? The silence that followed was answer enough. Come home, Garrett said finally, his voice back under control. We will figure this out. You are my daughter, Hannah, not by blood, maybe, but by choice. Warriors choose their family. I chose you. Hannah felt tears streaming down her face, but her voice was steady when she spoke. You are right. Warriors do choose their family, and I choose the ones with honor. I choose the ones who do not murder their brothers in arms. I choose my father's legacy, not yours. She hung up before he could respond. For a long moment, Hannah stood at the window, staring out at the lights of San Diego and trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Her entire life had been built on a foundation of lies, and now that foundation had crumbled, leaving her standing on nothing but the truth. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. She opened it with trembling fingers. The message was brief. Garrett hired Viktor Volkov, former Spetsnaz, counter-sniper specialist. 58 confirmed kills, 47 of them snipers. He is already in California, hunting both of you. Consider this a professional courtesy. You earned that much in Afghanistan. Signed, a friend. Hannah stared at the message for a long time, then showed it to the doctor who was finishing his paperwork. Do you have somewhere Master Chief Sullivan can recover that is not here and not on any official records? The doctor looked at her with the carefully neutral expression of someone who had seen too much to be shocked by anything. I might know a place. Why? Because we need to disappear, Hannah said, and we need to do it fast. 2 hours later, Hannah and Hawk were in a safe house in the mountains east of San Diego, a remote cabin owned by one of Hannah's former contractor contacts. It was defensible, off-grid, and most importantly, unknown to anyone connected to Garrett or his network. Hawk, heavily medicated but conscious, sat in a chair by the window while Hannah checked the perimeter and set up basic security protocols. When she came back inside, she found him staring at his phone with a troubled expression. What is wrong? Hannah asked. Hawk showed her the screen. It was a news article just posted within the last hour. Marine Corps Times investigative report. The headline read, Decorated Marine Colonel under investigation for alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. Someone leaked it, Hawk said. Someone got ahead of us. The story is out there now, partial at least, enough to start asking questions. Hannah felt her heart rate accelerate. This was what they had wanted, was not it? Exposure, public scrutiny, the truth in the light where Garrett could not suppress it. But the timing was wrong, the control was wrong, and she had a sudden terrible certainty about who had leaked the story. Garrett did this himself, Hannah said slowly. He is getting ahead of the narrative, controlling the story before we can, making himself look like a victim of political persecution instead of a war criminal. Hawk thought about this and nodded. Smart, very smart. Now, when we come forward with the full evidence, it will look like we are piling on, using old accusations for personal vendettas. He is poisoning the well. Hannah's phone rang. She looked at the screen and saw it was a number she recognized. A journalist she had worked with in her contractor days, someone who specialized in military investigations. She answered, This is Price. Staff Sergeant Price, this is Beth Morrison, Marine Corps Times. I am doing a follow-up on the Garrett story. I understand you were raised by Colonel Garrett after your father's death. I would love to get your perspective on the allegations. Hannah's mind raced. This was the moment. She could tell the whole truth right now, give Morrison everything, blow the story wide open. But something made her hesitate. No comment, Hannah said, finally. But if you want the real story, the whole story, give me 48 hours. I will give you documentation, testimony, everything you need. But I need time to put it together properly. I can do that, Morrison said. But Hannah, if there is more to this story, you should know that other outlets are circling. If you want to control the narrative, you need to move fast. I understand, 48 hours. Hannah hung up and looked at Hawk. We need to move faster than I thought. We need to gather everything, organize it, and get it to Morrison before Garrett can spin this completely. Can you help? Hawk nodded, pushing himself up from the chair with a grimace of pain. I can help. But Hannah, you need to understand something. Once we do this, there is no going back. Your contractor work, everything you did, it all comes out. Your military career is probably over. You might face charges. Your life as you know it ends. Hannah thought about her father, about Captain Derek Price, who had chosen honor over survival, who had done the right thing even though it cost him everything. She thought about the 9 people she had killed, wondering now how many of them had really deserved it. She thought about all the years she had spent in the shadows, serving causes she did not understand, following orders from a man who had murdered her father. It was time to step into the light, whatever the cost. I know, Hannah said, but maybe that life deserves to end. Maybe it is time to be who my father raised me to be in the 8 years I had with him instead of who Garrett made me in the 18 years after. Hawk smiled, a tired but genuine expression. Your father would be proud of you. I hope so, Hannah said quietly, because I am about to put everything on the line to honor his memory. They spent the rest of the night organizing evidence, writing timelines, preparing the documentation that would expose James Garrett and potentially destroy Hannah's own life in the process. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Hannah felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of someone who had found safety, but the peace of someone who had finally chosen a side and committed fully to the consequences. The war was just beginning, but for the first time since she was 8 years old, Hannah Price was fighting for something she truly believed in. Not shadows and secrets and deniable operations, but truth, honor, justice. The things her father had died for, the things she would live for or die trying. The safe house sat nestled in the mountains east of San Diego like a secret kept by the hills themselves. It was a small cabin constructed of weathered wood and stone, surrounded by scrub oak and manzanita, invisible from the road and accessible only by a dirt track that wound through terrain too rough for civilian vehicles. Hawk had acquired the property 15 years ago under a name that did not appear in any official records, one of several bolt holes he had established during his years in naval special warfare, places where a man could disappear when the world got too complicated. Now, 12 hours after the gunfight in the parking lot and the revelation that a professional killer named Viktor Volkov was hunting them, the cabin felt less like refuge and more like trap. Hawk sat in a chair by the window, his left shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages, watching the dawn light paint the eastern peaks in shades of copper and gold. The painkillers dulled the worst of the injury, but left him feeling disconnected, like he was observing the world through glass. Hannah moved through the cabin with the quiet efficiency of someone conducting a security check, testing sight lines and fields of fire, identifying weak points in their defensive position. She had been awake all night, Hawk knew, keeping watch while he slept in fitful intervals punctuated by dreams of his son and memories of battles long past. We cannot stay here long, Hannah said, returning to the main room. Volkov is good, the best, according to my sources. If he wants to find us, he will find us. Hawk nodded slowly, his tactical mind working through the problem despite the fog of medication. We cannot run forever. Garrett has resources, connections, money. He can hire as many killers as it takes. We need to change the game. Stop reacting and start acting. Hannah sat down across from him, and in the morning light, Hawk could see the exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes, the tension in her jaw. You are in no condition to fight, Master Chief. That shoulder needs time to heal. Then you fight, Hawk replied. I will be your spotter, your intelligence, your backup. Like old school sniper teams. One shoots, one observes, one acts, one plans. It is how SEALs operated before technology made us think we could do everything alone. Hannah studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. You are serious. Dead serious, Hawk said. You have the skills, better skills than anyone I have ever trained, if I am being honest. What you need is experience reading situations like this. Counter sniper work, defensive operations, psychological warfare. That I can teach you. And if Volkov gets past me, if I fail, then we both die, Hawk said simply. But we die fighting on our terms, not running scared. Your father faced his death with honor. We can do the same. The mention of her father seemed to settle something in Hannah. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Okay, teach me. Over the next 3 days, the cabin became a classroom and a crucible. Hawk could not demonstrate physically with his injured shoulder, but he could explain and Hannah could execute, her natural talent and years of training allowing her to grasp concepts that would take most operators months to master. On the first day, Hawk taught her the art of counter sniper operations. They walked the perimeter of the cabin despite his pain, Hawk pointing out sight lines and dead zones, explaining how a professional like Volkov would approach the problem of eliminating targets in a fortified position. He will not rush, Hawk explained, leaning on Hannah for support as they climbed to a rocky outcrop that overlooked the cabin. Men like Volkov survive because they are patient. He will observe for days, learning our patterns, identifying our routines. Then he will strike when we are most vulnerable. Hannah scanned the surrounding terrain with the intensity of someone who understood that knowledge meant survival. So we break the patterns. Never move at the same time twice. Never use the same routes. Make ourselves unpredictable. Partially correct, Hawk said. But there is more. You also create false patterns. Make him think he has identified your routine, then violate it at the critical moment. Let him set up for a shot that you will not be there to receive. I learned this in Fallujah, hunting insurgent snipers who were killing Marines from rooftops. They spent hours identifying positions where Volkov might establish himself, calculating distances and angles, discussing the physics of long-range precision fire. Hannah absorbed it all with the focused intensity that separated good operators from great ones. The thermal scopes are the problem, Hannah said as they returned to the cabin. Modern imaging can see through most concealment. How do I hide from something that can see my heat signature? You do not hide from it, Hawk replied. You confuse it. Heat sources that look like humans but are not. Reflective materials that bounce signatures in unexpected directions. Movement patterns that do not match human gait. Make the technology work against him instead of for him. That evening, Hannah constructed decoys using spare clothing and chemical heat packs, positioning them around the cabin perimeter in ways that would register on thermal imaging as potential targets. She rigged reflective panels that would create false signatures, and she mapped movement routes that used natural terrain to mask her heat signature. Hawk watched her work with professional admiration and something deeper, something almost paternal. She reminded him so much of Michael at that age, the same drive to excel, the same unwillingness to accept limitations. But where Michael had inherited Hawk's stubbornness without his caution, Hannah possessed a balance that suggested wisdom beyond her years. On the second day, Hawk taught her the psychology of the hunt. They sat in the cabin as rain drummed on the roof in a steady rhythm that felt almost meditative, and Hawk shared stories he had never told anyone outside the teams. Stories that he had kept locked away in the dark places of memory because speaking them aloud made them real again, made the ghosts walk and the old wounds bleed fresh. Stories about Mogadishu in '93, where he had earned his call sign and nearly died from a throat cut that would have killed a man less determined to survive. He described the chaos of that day, the way the city had turned into a maze of death, how he had been separated from his team and found himself face to face with a Somali militiaman in an alley that smelled of burning rubber and human waste. The man had been fast, faster than Hawk expected, and the machete had opened his throat before he could bring his rifle to bear. But Hawk had killed him anyway, silent as a bird of prey despite the blood pouring from his neck. Had killed him with his knife and kept killing until the other militiamen fled in terror from this American who would not die. He told her about Iraq, about Fallujah where he had hunted insurgent snipers through rubble that had once been homes and schools and mosques. He described the patience required to clear a city house by house, room by room, knowing that death could be waiting behind any door or window. He told her about the insurgent sniper he had tracked for 3 days, a man who had killed 6 Marines, how Hawk had finally found him in the ruins of a hospital, and how they had stared at each other for a long moment before Hawk pulled the trigger. The man had been younger than Hawk expected, maybe 20 years old, And in his eyes, Hawk had seen not hatred, but resignation. The look of someone who knew how the story ended. He shared stories about Afghanistan, about the mountains that seemed to conspire against American forces, about firefights at altitude where the thin air made every movement exhausting, and the enemy knew the terrain with the intimacy of centuries. He told her about a mission in Kandahar province where his team had been pinned down for 18 hours by a single sniper who seemed able to shoot through walls, how they had finally realized the shooter was using a tunnel system to change positions, making it seem like there were multiple snipers when there was only one. "Every man I killed, I remember," Hawk said quietly, staring into the fire Hannah had built in the stone fireplace. The flames dancing and crackling with a life of their own. Their faces, their positions, the weather conditions. What I was thinking in the moment before I pulled the trigger. The Somali in the alley. The insurgent in Fallujah who looked like somebody's son. The Taliban fighter in Kandahar who had been good enough to pin down an entire SEAL team. It is not glory. It is burden. You carry ghosts. Every single one of them. They visit you at night when you are trying to sleep. They ask you questions you cannot answer. They make you wonder if there was another way, a better way, a way that did not require their deaths. Hannah sat across from him, her knees drawn up to her chest, listening with the complete attention she gave to everything that mattered. The firelight played across her face, casting shadows that made her look older and younger at the same time. "Do the ghosts ever go away?" she asked. And there was something vulnerable in her voice, something that spoke of her own ghosts, her own questions. "No," Hawk said, "but you make peace with them. You accept that what you did was necessary, that the alternative would have been worse. You honor their memory by being worthy of the cost they paid. You try to live a life that justifies the deaths required to preserve it. Some days you succeed, some days you do not, but you keep trying." He paused, gathering courage for a confession he had never made aloud, words that had been burning inside him for a decade, demanding to be spoken. "My son Michael died in Iraq 10 years ago. IED, outside Fallujah, the same city where I had hunted snipers years before. He was 24 years old, a lieutenant in the Marine Corps, leading his platoon on patrol in a neighborhood that I probably walked through myself. I was stateside when it happened, going through a divorce that I deserved, drinking too much, failing as a father even before he died. Failing long before that, really. Failing from the moment I chose the teams over my family, chose missions over birthdays, chose glory over presents." Hannah said nothing, but her expression softened with understanding, and she reached out to place her hand on his knee, a simple gesture of comfort that carried more weight than words. "When they told me he was gone," Hawk continued, his voice rough with old grief that time had not healed, "I realized I had been so focused on being a warrior that I had forgotten to be a dad. I taught him how to shoot when he was 8 years old, the same age you were when Garrett started training you. I taught him how to fight, how to lead, how to endure pain and fear and hardship. I taught him the warrior code, the values of courage and honor and sacrifice. But I never taught him that it was okay to be afraid, okay to question orders, okay to choose life over glory. I made him into a Marine, but I never let him just be my son." "You think he died because of how you raised him?" Hannah asked gently. "I think he died because I taught him that warriors do not quit," Hawk said. "And when his platoon was pinned down and taking casualties, he led the charge to break contact instead of calling for support and waiting. He was brave, he was noble, and he was dead at 24 because I never taught him that there is no shame in survival." The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Outside, the rain intensified, turning the world beyond the windows into gray curtains of water. Finally, Hannah spoke. "You did not fail your son, Master Chief. He chose the warrior's path, same as my father, same as me. It is who we are. We do not choose it because of how we were raised. We choose it because it calls to something inside us that will not be silent." Hawk looked at her across the firelight and saw not just a trained operator, but a kindred spirit, someone who understood the terrible burden of the warrior's calling. "Maybe you are right, or maybe I just want to believe that so I can sleep at night. Either way," Hannah said, "you are here now, helping me, teaching me, protecting me. That is what a father does. Blood does not make family, choice does." On the third day, Hawk taught her about legacy. They were cleaning weapons together, The ritual maintenance that every warrior learns is both practical necessity and meditative practice. Hannah Field stripped her rifle with the automatic precision of thousands of repetitions, and Hawk watched her hands move with economy and grace. "What do you want to be remembered for?" Hawk asked. Hannah paused in her work, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I used to think I wanted to be remembered as the best sniper in the world. The longest shots, the most confirmed kills, the legend that other operators whispered about. Now I just want to be remembered as someone who did the right thing, someone my father would have been proud of." "Your father would already be proud of you," Hawk said. "You discovered the truth about his death. You chose honor over safety. You are everything he raised you to be in those 8 years before Garrett took over." "I killed 9 people for Garrett," Hannah said, her voice flat. "How many of them were really threats? How many of them were just in the way of his agenda?" "You did not know," Hawk replied. "You were manipulated by someone you trusted. That does not erase the responsibility, but it contextualizes it. What matters now is what you do with that knowledge." Hannah resumed her work on the rifle. "What I do is finish what my father started. Expose Garrett. Make sure no one else gets used the way I was used." "That is a good legacy," Hawk said. "Worth fighting for, worth dying for if it comes to that." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sound the click and scrape of metal on metal as they reassembled their weapons. When Hannah finished, she looked up at Hawk with an expression that mixed determination and vulnerability. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for believing me, for helping me, for—" She hesitated, then continued, "for being what I needed when I needed it most." Hawk felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly, the first easing of a grief he had carried for a decade. "You remind me of my son, the good parts, the parts I was too broken to appreciate when he was alive. Maybe helping you is my way of making peace with that. Maybe it is my way of being the father I should have been." Hannah stood and crossed the small space between them. She knelt beside his chair and did something that surprised them both. She laid her head on his good shoulder, the gesture of a child seeking comfort from a parent. Hawk froze for a moment, then wrapped his arm around her, holding her the way he wished he had held Michael more often. "You did not fail your son," Hannah said again, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "And you have not failed me. You are exactly what a father should be." They stayed like that for several minutes, two warriors finding something like peace in the simple human need for connection. When Hannah finally pulled back, there were tears on both their faces, but neither felt shame. Some moments were too honest for pretense. "Dad," Hannah said, testing the word carefully. Hawk smiled despite the tears. "Yeah, I like that." The moment was broken by a sound that made them both freeze. A single gunshot, distant but distinct, echoing across the valley from somewhere to the north. Then another. Then silence. Hannah was on her feet instantly, moving to the window with her rifle in hand. Hawk pushed himself up from the chair, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, his sidearm appearing in his hand through muscle memory. "That was at least 1,200 meters away," Hannah said, her voice calm and professional, despite the sudden tension. "Maybe 1,500. Hard to judge with the valley acoustics." "Warning shots," Hawk said. "He is announcing himself, letting us know he is here." Hannah moved to the door, but Hawk caught her arm. "Do not go out there. That is what he wants. He wants to draw you out, get you moving, force you into a mistake." They waited. Minutes passed like hours. Then through the window, Hannah saw something that made her blood run cold. A playing card pinned to a tree 50 meters from the cabin with a knife. Even from this distance, she could make out the design. Ace of Spades. The death card. "He was here," Hannah whispered. "Right here, close enough to pin that card. Close enough to kill us if he wanted to." "But he did not want to," Hawk said grimly. "He wants to play. He wants to make this interesting. Professional pride. He has been hired to kill us. But where's the glory in shooting fish in a barrel? So what do? We give him what he wants," Hawk said. "A hunt. A challenge. But we control the terms. We make him come to us on ground we have prepared." Over the next 24 hours, Volkov conducted a siege that was psychological as much as tactical. He did not attack directly. Instead, he cut their power with precision shots to the electrical panel. He severed their water line with a bullet that entered through the only exposed section of pipe. He demonstrated complete knowledge of their position and total control of the surrounding terrain. On the first night of the siege, a gunshot echoed across the valley every hour on the hour. Not aimed at the cabin, just fired into the air or the hillside. A reminder that Volkov was out there, watching, waiting. Hannah and Hawk took turns on watch, but neither could truly rest with the regular percussion of rifle fire marking time like a countdown to something terrible. On the second night, flares lit up the perimeter at irregular intervals, turning night into day for brief moments that destroyed their night vision and made them vulnerable. Each flare was launched from a different position, demonstrating that Volkov was mobile, unpredictable, always moving. On the third night, there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. No gunshots, no flares, no sound except the wind in the trees and the distant call of coyotes. Somehow the silence was more terrifying than the attacks. It suggested patience, planning, the calm before violence. Hannah stood at the window in the pre-dawn darkness of the fourth day, exhausted and wired, her nerves stretched to breaking. We cannot keep this up. He is wearing us down. Sooner or later we make a mistake and he exploits it. Hawk, who had been studying topographical maps by flashlight, looked up. Then we change the game. We stop being hunted and become hunters. We draw him into a position where you can take him. How? He knows this terrain better than we do now. He has been mapping it for days. Because he is arrogant, Hawk said. He thinks he is the better sniper. He thinks he can outplay us. We use that. We create a scenario that appeals to his pride. A sniper duel. Old school. Him against you. Skill versus skill. Hannah considered this. It is risky. If I lose, we both die. If we stay here, we both die anyway, Hawk replied. At least this way, we die fighting on our terms. They spent the next hours planning. The trap would be simple in concept, but complex in execution. Hannah would establish two shooting positions. One would be obvious, the kind of hide that a less experienced sniper might think was well concealed, but that a professional like Volkov would spot immediately. The second position would be 400 meters away, perfectly camouflaged using every technique Hawk had taught her. The plan was for Volkov to find the false hide and wait for Hannah to occupy it, giving him what he thought would be an easy shot. But Hannah would be in the real position, waiting for him to reveal himself by taking that shot. When he did, she would have a narrow window to locate and engage him before he could relocate. It was risky. If Volkov did not take the bait, or if he spotted the real hide, or if Hannah could not locate him fast enough, they would die. But it was better than waiting for him to pick the time and place. Hannah spent the afternoon constructing the false hide, making it good enough to seem legitimate, but leaving subtle tells that a master like Volkov would spot. She positioned it with a clear field of fire toward the cabin, the obvious position for someone trying to protect the structure. Then she moved to her real position, a rocky outcrop 400 meters to the east, and spent hours perfecting her concealment. Hawk remained in the cabin, watching through optics, ready to provide intelligence if he spotted Volkov first. They communicated through encrypted radios, their voices low and professional. Dawn broke cold and clear on the fifth day, painting the valley in shades of pink and gold. Hannah had been in position for 6 hours, motionless as stone, controlling her breathing and her heart rate the way Garrett had taught her when she was 12 years old. Every muscle ached. Her eyes burned from staring through the scope, but she remained absolutely still, knowing that motion was death. The voice came through her radio, speaking English with a Russian accent that was precise and cultured. Hannah Price, I know this is a trap. I know you are not in that hide, but I also know where you actually are. Hannah felt ice water pour through her veins. A bullet impacted 2 feet from her position, throwing rock chips that stung her face even through her camouflage. The shot had come from somewhere to the northwest, range impossible to judge without seeing the muzzle flash. Next shot will not miss, Volkov continued, his voice calm and professional. Unless you give me what I want. What do you want? Hannah asked, buying time while her mind raced through calculations. Professional courtesy. Stand up, walk away. This is not your fight. This is between Garrett and your friend the SEAL. You do not have to die for an old man's sins. In the cabin, Hawk listened to the exchange through his radio, his heart hammering. Do not trust him, he transmitted. Hannah kept her voice steady. Why offer me a deal? Because I respect skill, Volkov replied. I have studied your record. 3,247 meters. Afghanistan. Mahmoud kill. Impressive. Very impressive. I appreciate artistry. You are artist. Artists should not die in ambushes. They should die if they must die in worthy contests. This is worthy contest, Hannah said. You versus me. Skill versus skill. There was a pause. Then Volkov laughed, a sound without humor. You are in exposed position with no clear shot. I am in superior position with clear line to your location. This is not contest. This is execution that I am generously delaying. Then execute, Hannah said, and something in her voice must have conveyed her resolve because Volkov stopped laughing. You are serious. You would rather die than walk away. I walked toward things, not away, Hannah said, remembering her father's words, remembered lessons from a man she barely knew but whose legacy she carried. That is what my father taught me, before your employer killed him for it. Another pause, longer this time. You know about Derek Price. I know everything, Hannah said. I know Garrett murdered my father. I know he raised me as weapon. I know you are being paid to clean up his mess, but you are not cleaning up anything. You are just another killer in a long line of people who chose money over morality. You judge me? Volkov's voice carried an edge now. I am soldier. I follow contracts. Same as you did. Not anymore, Hannah said. Now I choose my own contracts, and my contract is justice for my father. The silence that followed stretched so long that Hannah began to wonder if Volkov had disconnected. Then his voice came back, different somehow, more personal. Your father, Derek Price. I read about him after Garrett hired me. Read the reports, the civilians he tried to protect, the stand he took. He was good man, rare in this business. Yes, Hannah said, he was. It is unfortunate that such men do not survive, Volkov said. The world needs them, but the world also eats them. This is nature of things. Maybe, Hannah replied. Or maybe the world changes one person at a time, one choice at a time, one stand at a time. Volkov seemed to consider this. You will not walk away. You will fight until one of us is dead. Yes, then let us make it interesting, Volkov said, and Hannah heard something that might have been respect in his voice. I will relocate. You will relocate. We both start fresh. Next contact, we see who is better hunter. Da? Da, Hannah agreed, using the Russian word for yes. The radio went silent. Hannah waited 30 seconds, then began her extraction from the position, moving with the careful speed of someone who understood that Volkov might have been lying, that he might be sighting in on her right now. But no shot came. He had meant what he said. He wanted a real contest. Over the next 6 hours, Hannah and Volkov played a deadly game of cat and mouse across 3 square miles of mountain terrain, a chess match conducted with rifles and optics across distances that turned human beings into distant specks, barely visible through high-powered scopes. Each would establish a position with meticulous care, taking 20 or 30 minutes to construct concealment that would fool even trained observers. Then scan for the other with the methodical patience of predators, then relocate before they could be pinned down and targeted. It was exhausting work, physically and mentally demanding in ways that pushed even Hannah's considerable endurance to the limit, requiring constant calculation of angles and distances and probabilities, constant awareness of wind and light and terrain. The mountain landscape became a 3-dimensional battlefield where elevation was power and patience was survival. Hannah moved through the terrain like a ghost, using every depression and boulder and stand of manzanita for concealment, never skyline herself, never creating patterns that Volkov could exploit. She established positions that gave her overlapping fields of fire, positions that allowed her to observe likely approaches without exposing herself to observation from those same approaches. It was the art of hunting taken to its highest form, the ancient dance of predator and prey, elevated by technology, but governed by the same primal rules that had existed since humans first learned to kill from a distance. Hawk provided what support he could from the cabin, using optics to scan for signs of Volkov's position, transmitting warnings when he thought he spotted movement or thermal anomalies, or anything that seemed out of place in the natural pattern of the terrain. But mostly he watched and marveled at the level of skill on display, 2 masters of their craft conducting a duel that most people would never witness and would not understand if they did. He had trained snipers for 3 decades, had worked with some of the best marksmen in the American military, but what he was observing now was something beyond standard excellence. This was artistry, 2 virtuosos performing a deadly symphony where every note mattered and a single mistake meant death. The sun climbed toward noon, and the temperature rose with it, creating heat shimmer that made distance shooting even more challenging, turning the air itself into a distorting lens that played tricks with depth perception and made range finding uncertain. Hannah had relocated 6 times, each position carefully chosen for concealment in sight lines, each move calculated to put her in position to observe likely areas while remaining unobservable herself. She was beginning to feel the strain now, the adrenaline crash that came after hours of maximum alertness, the way exhaustion crept in at the edges of awareness and made concentration difficult. Her hands shook slightly when she settled into each new position, and she had to consciously control her breathing to keep it steady and regular. She knew Volkov was feeling the same strain. He was wounded, his shoulder compromised, which would affect his ability to maintain shooting positions and make quick movements between hides. But he was also experienced, had survived dozens of hunts like this, and experience counted for more than youth when fatigue became the enemy. The question was, who would make the first fatal mistake? Who would let exhaustion override training? Who would take a shortcut or make an assumption or relax vigilance for just a moment? Then she saw it, around 1:30 in the afternoon when the heat was at its peak and the shimmer was worst. A heat signature that did not quite match the surrounding terrain, a thermal anomaly that was subtle and easily dismissed as natural variation, but that caught Hannah's attention because it was in exactly the wrong place, a location that offered good sight lines to 3 of her previous positions. It was subtle, barely noticeable, the kind of thing that 99% of people would miss entirely or disregard as insignificant. But Hannah had been trained by the best, had spent 18 years learning to see what others missed, and what Hawk had taught her about thermal signatures was fresh in her mind, sharp with the clarity of recent instruction. Volkov had made a mistake, a small one, a minor error in camouflage placement or body positioning that created a heat signature different from the natural thermal pattern of sun-heated rock and vegetation. But at this level, among operators of this caliber, small mistakes were fatal. The margin for error was measured in millimeters and fractions of degrees, and any deviation from perfect execution created an opening that a skilled opponent could exploit. She ranged the target with her laser rangefinder, the device giving her a precise distance measurement. 1,450 meters. Difficult shot, challenging even under ideal conditions, and nearly impossible given the heat shimmer and variable wind, but makeable if she did everything right, if she accounted for every factor and executed flawlessly. Wind was variable, gusting between 5 and 10 miles per hour from the southwest, which would push the bullet right and require compensation. Temperature differential between barrel and ambient air would affect the bullet trajectory in ways that were hard to calculate precisely. She would need to account for Coriolis effect at that distance, the rotation of the Earth itself influencing the path of a bullet in flight for 2 full seconds. Altitude, air pressure, humidity, the slight cant in her rifle if she was not perfectly level, all of it had to be factored into the shot. Hannah settled into her shooting position, the process automatic after thousands of repetitions, her body finding the natural point of aim without conscious thought. She controlled her breathing, inhaling slowly through her nose and exhaling through pursed lips, slowing her heart rate through deliberate control of her autonomic nervous system, the way Garrett had taught her when she was 12 years old, too young to understand why it mattered, but old enough to master the technique. She became one with the rifle, an extension of the weapon rather than a separate entity operating it, achieving that state of perfect union that separated good shooters from great ones. She made her calculations, running through the mental checklist that had been drilled into her through years of training. Wind, range, temperature, Coriolis, angle, all of it processed and integrated into a firing solution that existed more as feeling than conscious thought. She adjusted her scope, the clicks of the elevation turret precise and deliberate, dialing in the corrections that would put the bullet exactly where it needed to go. And then she waited for the perfect moment, the confluence of factors that would give her the highest probability of success. The moment came like a gift from God. The wind dropped to almost nothing, falling away to stillness between gusts. Her breathing reached the natural pause between exhale and inhale, that moment of suspension where the body was perfectly still. The heat shimmer seemed to clear for just an instant, the air becoming transparent. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger with the gentle pressure of a lover's touch, steady and smooth and inevitable. The rifle fired. The bullet flew for just over 2 seconds, covering the distance in a flat arc that dropped only inches, thanks to the precision of modern ammunition and ballistics. Hannah watched through her scope, tracking the impact point. The heat signature jerked and moved erratically. Hit. She had hit him. Through her radio, she heard a sound that might have been a grunt of pain, then Volkov's voice, tight but controlled. Good shot. Very good shot. Shoulder. Not fatal. You have earned your reputation. Hannah kept her scope on the position, ready for a follow-up shot, but Volkov was already moving, disappearing into the terrain with the skill of someone who had survived dozens of firefights. She did not pursue. Wounded prey was dangerous, and she had no way of knowing if he was baiting another trap. Master Chief, she transmitted. I hit him. Shoulder wound. He is mobile and dangerous but hurt. Copy that, Hawk replied. Return to the cabin. We need to consolidate and prepare for his next move. Hannah made her way back carefully, using every bit of cover, never relaxing her vigilance. When she finally reached the cabin, she found Hawk at the window, his rifle trained on the approaches. He will come back, Hawk said. Wounded predators are the most dangerous kind. But when morning came, Volkov had not returned. Instead, Hannah found a package sitting on the doorstep, placed there sometime during the night while they slept in shifts. Inside was a high-end Russian military spotting scope, probably worth $10,000 or more. Also inside was a note, written in precise English on plain paper. You earned this. You are a true hunter. But this is not over. Garrett doubled my payment. I will heal. I will return. And next time I will not offer mercy. Professional respect does not mean professional forgiveness. We are still enemies, but you are worthy enemy. That is rare gift. Use scope well. You will need it. Frost. Under the note was another item that made Hannah's breath catch. A file folder labeled with Garrett's name. Inside were documents, photographs, and what looked like architectural plans for a ranch compound in Arizona. He is giving you the target, Hawk said, reading over her shoulder. But it is still a trap. Garrett's place will be a fortress. Then we do not attack the fortress, Hannah said, her mind already working through the problem. We make him come out. We take away the one thing Garrett values more than power, his reputation. She pulled out her phone and called Beth Morrison, the Marine Corps Times journalist. When Morrison answered, Hannah spoke with absolute clarity. I am ready to give you the whole story, everything. Documentation, testimony, evidence. Meet me in San Diego tomorrow. I will give you enough material to bury Colonel Garrett so deep he will never see daylight again. After hanging up, Hannah looked at Hawk. Once we expose him publicly, he will have to respond. He will have to come after us himself, not through proxies. He will have to finish this personally. And when he does? Hawk asked. When he does, Hannah said, her voice hard as stone, I will be waiting, and this time I will not miss. They spent that night preparing for the confrontation that would end everything one way or another, organizing evidence with the meticulous care of people who understood that details mattered. They compiled documentation from multiple sources, creating a timeline of Garrett's crimes that stretched back decades. The war crimes in Afghanistan were just the most recent chapter in a story that included questionable operations in Somalia, illegal arms deals in the Balkans, and contractor work that violated both American law and international conventions. Hannah wrote her statement longhand first, the words coming slowly and painfully as she confronted the full scope of what she had been part of. She described her training at Northern Tactical Solutions, the way young people with military potential were recruited and sharpened into operators who would work in the shadows. She detailed the contracts she had taken, listing dates and locations and targets, admitting what she knew and acknowledging what she suspected. 9 kills that she could document, possibly more if some missions had been actual operations disguised as exercises. Hawk worked on the technical documentation, pulling together financial records that showed money flowing through shell corporations, contracts that existed only as encrypted files, communications that referenced operations by code words. He had contacts in military intelligence who owed him favors, people who could access databases and retrieve information that was supposed to be destroyed or classified. The network of loyalty built over 3 decades was paying dividends now. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire, Hannah stood at the window and thought about her father and the choice he had made when he filed that war crimes report, knowing it would likely cost him everything. She understood now what that choice had required, the courage it took to stand against your own when they violated the principles they claimed to serve. That was the legacy she would claim, the inheritance that no one could take from her, no matter what happened in the days to come. Her father had been a man who believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous, even when it cost him his life. She would honor that belief by following his example, by standing in the light instead of hiding in shadows, by accepting the consequences of her actions instead of running from them. Hawk came to stand beside her at the window, his shoulders still bandaged but his bearing straight and strong. "Your father would be proud of you," he said quietly, "not just for your skills or your courage, for your character, for choosing the hard right over the easy wrong." Hannah felt tears on her cheeks but did not wipe them away. "I hope so," she said, "because I am about to put everything on the line to honor his memory. My career, my freedom, possibly my life." Hawk put his arm around her shoulders. "That is what makes it matter. Nothing worth having comes without cost. Your father understood that. I understand that. And now you understand it too." The wolf had raised her, teaching her to hunt and kill and survive in the shadows. But the shepherd's blood ran in her veins, the legacy of a man who believed that some things were worth more than survival, that honor and truth and justice mattered more than life itself. Hannah Price was ready to make those choices and face those tests. She was ready to step fully into the light, to claim her father's legacy and reject the twisted mentorship of the man who had killed him. The path ahead was dangerous and the outcome uncertain. Garrett would fight with everything he had. Volkov would return eventually, healed and ready to finish the contract. There would be battles ahead, both physical confrontations and legal battles in courtrooms, where truth would compete with political expediency. But Hannah was not afraid anymore. Fear had been her constant companion for so long that its absence felt strange. She had spent half her life afraid of failing Garrett, afraid of not being good enough. Now she was choosing her own path, defining her own purpose, and fear had no place in that new reality. That was her promise to Derek Price, the father she barely remembered, but whose principles she carried in her heart. That was her commitment to Hawk, the man who had become a father to her when she needed one most. That was her oath to herself, to the woman she was becoming instead of the weapon Garrett had tried to create. The legacy of violence or the legacy of honor, the wolf's teaching or the shepherd's blood. In the end, there was no contest. Honor would win because Hannah Price had chosen to make it win. The war was just beginning. But for the first time since she was 8 years old, Hannah Price was fighting for something she truly believed in. Not shadows and secrets, undeniable operations, but truth, honor, justice. The things her father had died for, the things she would live for or die trying. The meeting with Beth Morrison took place in a coffee shop in downtown San Diego, the kind of anonymous location where business people met for lunch and students studied for exams, where two people having an intense conversation would blend into the background noise of a city that never stopped moving. Hannah arrived 30 minutes early, scanning faces and exits with the automatic awareness that had become second nature over years of operating in hostile environments. She chose a table in the corner with sightlines to both entrances and the emergency exit through the kitchen, positioning herself so she could see anyone approaching while keeping her back protected. Hawk sat 3 tables away, his injured shoulder concealed beneath a jacket, providing overwatch the way he had promised he would, his eyes constantly moving across the crowd with the professional vigilance of someone who had survived by never relaxing. Beth Morrison arrived exactly on time, a woman in her early 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp eyes that missed nothing. The kind of intelligence that came from years of asking hard questions and following difficult truths wherever they led. She carried a leather messenger bag that looked expensive and well-used, the tool of a professional who took her work seriously. Hannah recognized the type immediately. Morrison was not the kind of journalist who chased celebrity gossip or recycled press releases. She was the kind who broke stories that ended careers and changed policies, who asked questions that powerful people did not want answered, whose byline appeared on investigations that made government officials sweat and lawyers scramble for damage control. They shook hands and ordered coffee, making small talk about traffic and weather while sizing each other up in the way that professionals do when meeting for the first time, each trying to gauge the other's credibility and commitment. Morrison's handshake was firm without being aggressive, her manner direct without being hostile. She was evaluating Hannah the way a buyer evaluates merchandise, looking for cracks in the facade or tells that suggested dishonesty. Then Morrison pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the table between them with a soft click that felt like a starting gun. "Everything we discuss is on the record unless you specifically say otherwise," Morrison said, her voice carrying the flat authority of someone who had given this speech many times before. "I will fact-check everything you tell me. Every claim, every date, every name. If I find inconsistencies or lies, I will expose them in the article alongside your allegations. My reputation depends on accuracy, not on protecting sources who feed me bad information. Do you understand?" Hannah respected the directness, found it almost refreshing after years of operating in worlds where everything was coded and nothing was quite what it seemed. "I understand. What I am about to tell you is true. All of it can be verified through documentation that I will provide. Some of it will be difficult to hear. Some of it will implicate me in activities that may be illegal. But it is the truth, and the truth is what my father died trying to expose 20 years ago." She spent the next 3 hours telling her story, starting with the car accident that killed her parents when she was 8 and ending with the decision to go public despite the personal cost. She described Garrett's training in methodical detail, the way he had systematically shaped her from grieving child into precision instrument, teaching her to shoot before she was old enough to understand the weight of taking a life. She explained the recruitment by Northern Tactical Solutions, how instructors at civilian shooting competitions had identified her potential and offered opportunities that seemed patriotic, but were actually pipelines into private military contracting. She detailed the 9 kills she could confirm, providing dates and locations and as much context as she could remember about each operation. The arms dealer in Syria who turned out to be a CIA informant investigating weapons trafficking. The Taliban commander in Afghanistan whose death had served Pakistani intelligence interests rather than American security. Each operation sold to her as serving national interests, each one potentially serving agendas she had not understood until it was too late. Morrison recorded it all, occasionally stopping to ask clarifying questions or request additional details. Her questions were sharp and probing, designed to catch inconsistencies or expose exaggerations. She pushed Hannah on timeline details, asked for specific names and unit designations, demanded documentation for claims that seemed too convenient or too dramatic. It was an interrogation disguised as an interview, and Hannah respected Morrison more for not pretending otherwise. When Hannah described her father's death and the evidence she had uncovered about Objective Sandstorm, Morrison's expression hardened with the look of someone who recognized a story that needed to be told regardless of consequences. She asked Hannah to repeat certain details, to clarify the chain of evidence, to explain how she had obtained documents that should have been classified beyond her access level. Each question was designed to bulletproof the eventual article against accusations of sloppy journalism or reliance on unreliable sources. When Hannah finished, Morrison sat back and studied her for a long moment, her recorder still running, capturing the silence that followed confession. "You understand that once I publish this, there is no taking it back," Morrison said finally. "Your military career is over. You will likely face criminal charges for your contractor work, possibly federal prosecution, depending on which agencies were involved. Garrett will come after you with everything he has, and he has connections in places that can make your life very difficult. Legal harassment, financial pressure, possibly worse. Are you prepared for that?" "My father died standing up for what was right," Hannah said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear that curled in her stomach like cold smoke. "The least I can do is finish what he started. Whatever happens to me after that is secondary to stopping Garrett from using anyone else the way he used me." Morrison nodded slowly, and something in her expression suggested approval or at least understanding. "I will need time to verify the documentation and contact military sources for comment. Some of this will require Freedom of Information Act requests that could take days. Figure 72 hours minimum before publication, possibly longer if verification proves difficult. Use that time wisely. Once this goes live, the world changes for you in ways you cannot fully anticipate." They arranged for the secure transfer of documents through encrypted channels, protocols that Morrison explained would protect both of them from surveillance by parties who might want to prevent publication. Hannah had prepared thumb drives with copies of everything, evidence organized by topic and cross-referenced with supporting documentation. Derek Price's War Crimes Report. After action reports from Objective Sandstorm. Financial records showing money flowing from Garrett's corporations to offshore accounts. Her own contracts with Northern Tactical Solutions, carefully preserved despite the risk they represented. Morrison left first, disappearing into the afternoon crowd with her recorder and notes and thumb drives, carrying the story that would destroy James Garrett's carefully constructed reputation and possibly end Hannah's freedom. Hannah waited 5 minutes as planned, using the time to scan for surveillance or signs that the meeting had been compromised, then stood to leave, catching Hawk's eye as she moved toward the exit. They met at the truck, parked 3 blocks away in a structure that offered multiple escape routes and clear sight lines to approaches. Hannah slid into the passenger seat and closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what she had just set in motion pressing down on her chest like a physical force. "It is done," she said. Hawk started the engine but did not immediately pull out, his hands resting on the steering wheel while he studied her profile. "Are you okay?" Hannah opened her eyes and looked at him. This man who had become father to her in the space of weeks, who had risked everything to help her pursue a truth that could destroy them both. "Ask me that question in a week, after the article runs and Garrett responds. Right now I am functioning. That is the best I can manage." "Functioning is enough," Hawk replied, putting the truck in gear. "Functioning keeps you alive until you can do better. I have seen Marines function for months on nothing but discipline and duty while everything else inside them was broken. Functioning is how you survive until you heal." They drove back to the safe house in silence, both of them aware that the next 72 hours would determine whether Hannah's gamble would pay off or whether she had just destroyed her life for nothing. The article dropped on a Wednesday morning, timed to coincide with the East Coast news cycle when maximum attention could be generated. The headline was simple and devastating: "American Hero or War Criminal? The Dark Truth About Colonel James Garrett." Morrison had done her work thoroughly. The article detailed that Objective Sandstorm with precision, including excerpts from Derek Price's War Crimes Report and testimony from other members of the unit who had finally agreed to speak on the record after years of silence. It exposed the Northern Tactical Solutions pipeline that recruited young people with military potential and shaped them into contractors who operated in legal gray areas. It revealed Garrett's business empire, built on military connections and classified information, a network of shell corporations and offshore accounts that existed to profit from America's endless wars. And it told Hannah's story not as victim, but as someone who had been manipulated into service by a man she trusted, who had finally discovered the truth and chosen to expose it despite the personal cost. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Major news networks picked up the story within hours. Social media exploded with debate about accountability and the privatization of military operations, and whether soldiers had a duty to disobey illegal orders. The Marine Corps announced an investigation. The Department of Defense issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging concerns while emphasizing the need for due process. Hannah watched it all unfold from the safe house, monitoring news coverage on Hawk's laptop while he kept watch on the perimeter. For the first 12 hours, it seemed like the gamble had worked, like truth was emerging into light and justice would follow. Then Garrett struck back. The press conference was held at a hotel in Phoenix, arranged with less than 4 hours' notice, but covered by every major news outlet as if it were a presidential address. Garrett appeared in full Marine dress blues, his uniform immaculate, and his chest covered with ribbons and medals earned over 3 decades of service, looking every inch the decorated warrior rather than accused war criminal. He stood behind a podium bearing the seal of some veterans organization Hannah had never heard of, flanked by men in expensive suits who radiated the careful neutrality of attorneys who specialized in high-stakes damage control. The room was packed with cameras and reporters, the air thick with anticipation of the kind that only comes when everyone knows they are witnessing something significant. Garrett did not deny the allegations. Instead, he embraced them with a defiance that took everyone by surprise. A calculated gamble that transformed him from defendant to prosecutor in the space of a single statement. "Yes, I killed Derek Price," Garrett said, his voice steady and clear and amplified through speakers that carried his words to millions watching on live television. "He was my friend, my brother in arms, the best operator I ever served with, and he was about to destroy good Marines who had done their jobs under impossible circumstances, who had made split-second decisions in combat that armchair generals and civilian lawyers would judge from positions of safety and comfort. He paused, letting the words sink in, his expression grave but unrepentant. The so-called civilians at that village were feeding Taliban fighters. They were providing material support to enemy forces that were killing Americans. Intelligence confirmed weapons caches in their homes, communications equipment, medical supplies that were being used to patch up insurgents so they could return to killing our people. When you give aid and comfort to the enemy in a war zone, you are no longer a civilian. You are a combatant. My Marines understood that. Derek Price did not. The room erupted with the questions, reporters shouting over each other, but Garrett raised his hand for silence with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I made a choice that day, he continued, his voice taking on the weight of practiced rhetoric. Protect my men or let them go to prison for doing what needed to be done, for making decisions that kept other Americans alive. I chose my men. I would make the same choice today. In war, there are no clean hands. There are only people willing to do what is necessary and people who hide behind rules while others die for their principles. The narrative shift was masterful. Garrett was not denying the crime but reframing it, transforming murder into difficult leadership decision, turning war crime into wartime necessity. He was playing to an audience of veterans and military families who understood the impossible choices that combat sometimes demanded, who knew that the law of armed conflict looked different when you were the one making split-second decisions with lives hanging in the balance. Then he dropped the bombshell that Hannah had not anticipated, the knife twist that would destroy whatever credibility she had built with her confession. And as for Staff Sergeant Hannah Price, Garrett continued, his expression hardening into something cold and calculated, she paints herself as a victim, manipulated into service by an evil mentor who corrupted her innocence. It is a compelling narrative. Young woman orphaned at 8, shaped by cruel guardian into instrument of death. Very sympathetic. But she is no innocent, and I will prove it with her own records. He proceeded to systematically dismantle Hannah's credibility, revealing details about her contractor work that she had planned to disclose on her own terms, but which now sounded damning coming from Garrett's mouth. He had documentation, he claimed, of 9 confirmed kills she made while on his payroll, each one paid for with money transferred to offshore accounts in her name. He read the operations with clinical precision, names and dates and locations. Each kill detailed and contextualized in a way that made Hannah sound like a mercenary rather than someone who believed she was serving her country. The Hassan Mahmoud operation in Afghanistan, the record-breaking shot that Hannah had thought was eliminating a terrorist planning a chemical weapons attack, Garrett revealed as the assassination of a Pakistani intelligence officer who was investigating American contractor operations in the border regions. He showed bank records indicating Hannah had received $50,000 for that kill, wire transferred through shell corporations designed to hide the source. Target after target, Garrett methodically destroyed the narrative that Hannah was a manipulated victim, painting instead a picture of a willing participant who had profited from illegal operations and was now trying to escape responsibility by blaming her former employer when the heat became too intense. Look at the amounts, Garrett said, displaying financial records on screens around the room. $50,000, $30,000, $75,000. These are not the payments of someone being manipulated. These are the fees of a professional who knew exactly what she was doing and what she was being paid to do. Hannah Price was not coerced. She was compensated, very well compensated. The media ate it up, cameras zooming in on documents that may or may not have been authentic, but which looked official enough to pass cursory inspection. Garrett was giving them exactly what they needed to both sides of the story to transform a clear narrative of war crimes and murder into a muddy tale of moral equivalence where everyone was guilty of something. Hannah Price has blood on her hands, Garrett concluded. She is trying to destroy me because she cannot handle the truth about what she is. A killer, a weapon, just like I trained her to be. The only difference is that I own what I am. She is still pretending to be something else. The media pivot was immediate and brutal. Within hours, the story shifted from Garrett's alleged war crimes to questions about Hannah's credibility and complicity. Cable news ran split screens showing Garrett in his dress blues next to Hannah's official Marine photograph, asking whether she was a whistleblower or a mercenary trying to avoid prosecution. Social media turned savage, with people who had never served a day in uniform offering opinions about military ethics and the morality of killing. By evening, the Marine Corps announced that Hannah was being placed on administrative leave, pending investigation into her contractor activities. Fellow Marines at Camp Pendleton, people who had trained with her and respected her skills, now looked at her differently. Not as an instructor who had shared her expertise, but as someone who had hidden a dark secret, who had killed for money while pretending to be a regular Marine. Hannah watched the coverage in stunned silence, feeling the foundations of her life cracking and crumbling beneath her. She had expected Garrett to fight back, had anticipated legal challenges and attempts to discredit her testimony. But she had not expected this, the complete destruction of her reputation and the revelation of truths she had planned to admit on her own terms. Hawk sat beside her, his expression grim. He is trying to make you like him, trying to prove that you are no better than he is, that everyone operates in moral gray areas, and the only difference is who admits it. Hannah felt numb, disconnected from the chaos unfolding on the screen. He is succeeding. Look at them. They are not asking whether he murdered my father. They are asking whether I am a hypocrite for exposing him. You told the truth, Hawk said firmly. You admitted your role. You are not hiding anything. That matters. Does it? Hannah asked, and there was a brittleness in her voice that spoke of fracturing faith. Because from where I am sitting, all I have accomplished is destroying my own life while Garrett walks free. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Hannah almost did not answer, but something made her pick up. When she heard Garrett's voice, she understood why. You wanted war, Hannah, Garrett said, his tone almost conversational. You got war, but it is not just me you are fighting now. It is your own conscience, your own reputation, your own military career. I am taking everything from you, just like you tried to take from me. I am not afraid of you, Hannah said, but her voice lacked conviction. You should be, Garrett replied, because I am not coming alone, and I am not playing by rules anymore. You want to expose my sins? Fine, but I am taking you down with me. When this is over, people will remember us the same way. Two killers who operated in the shadows. The only difference is that I never pretended to be anything else. He hung up before Hannah could respond. The next 48 hours became a blur of media requests that Hannah declined, legal communications from military investigators she could not avoid, and the slow realization that the gamble she had taken was backfiring in ways she had not anticipated. Garrett had turned her weapon against her, using her own honesty as evidence of hypocrisy, her own confession as proof that she was no better than he was. On the third day after the article, Hannah sat alone in the safe house while Hawk was out securing supplies. She stared at her service pistol lying on the table, thinking about how easy it would be to end the torment, to step out of a fight she was losing badly. She had lost her reputation, her career, possibly her freedom. And for what? Garrett was still free, still defiant, still winning. The knock on the door brought her back from dark thoughts. She moved to the window, hand on her concealed sidearm, and saw a face she recognized. Sergeant David Chen, a Marine she had trained with, someone she had considered a friend. Hannah opened the door cautiously. David, what are you doing here? Chen stepped inside, his expression troubled. I needed to talk to you, away from the base, away from everyone. Hannah relaxed slightly. If you are here to ask if the stories are true, yes. All of it. I did those things. I am guilty of exactly what Garrett says. Chen closed the door behind him. I know. I have known for a while. Something in his tone made Hannah tense again. What do you mean? Chen's expression shifted, becoming harder. I mean, I have known about your contractor work for 2 years. Colonel Garrett told me. He told me because I am one of his too. The revelation hit Hannah like a physical blow. You? Chen nodded. He recruited me 5 years ago when I was 19 and angry and looking for purpose. Trained me, shaped me, made me into what I am. Everything you went through, I went through first. You think you are special? You think you are the only one he turned into a weapon? Hannah's hand moved toward her sidearm, but Chen was faster. His pistol appeared and aimed at her center mass before she could clear leather. Do not, Chen said quietly. I do not want to hurt you, but I will if I have to. Hannah froze, calculating angles and distances, looking for openings that did not exist. Why are you here, David? Because Colonel Garrett gave me an order. He said you were going to destroy everything we built. that you were going to send good people to prison because you could not handle what we are. We are soldiers, Hannah said carefully. We follow lawful orders. What Garrett does is not lawful. Chen laughed, a bitter sound. You think there is a difference? You think the kills you made through official channels are somehow cleaner than the ones you made for Garrett? They are all the same, Hannah. All of them. Dead is dead. The only difference is the paperwork. Hannah saw the pain behind his defiance, recognized the same crisis of faith she had experienced when she learned about her father. You do not believe that. If you did, you would not look so miserable right now. I believe what I have to believe, Chen said, but his gun hand wavered slightly, because the alternative is admitting that I am monster, that everything I have done, everyone I have killed, it was all for nothing but money and an old man's agenda. It is not too late, Hannah said softly. You can walk away, choose different path. My father did, I did, you can too. For a moment, Chen's expression softened, and Hannah thought she might reach him. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and whatever he saw there hardened his resolve. Colonel Garrett says your SEAL friend is on his way back, that I should leave before he arrives, that the team will handle both of you together. Hannah felt ice water pour through her veins. What team? Chen backed toward the door, his pistol still trained on her. I am sorry, Hannah. I wish you had just stayed quiet, stayed in line. We could have done great things together. He was gone before Hannah could respond, disappearing into the afternoon while she stood frozen, processing the implications. Garrett knew about the safe house. He knew Hawk's movements. He was sending a team. She grabbed her phone and called Hawk. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. She tried again with the same result. Then she armed herself with everything she could carry and prepared for the attack she knew was coming. The assault came at dusk when the light was failing and shadows made targeting difficult. That golden hour when everything was bathed in amber light that turned the desert beautiful even as it concealed death. Hannah saw them approaching through her optics, 4 men moving with professional coordination across terrain they had clearly reconnoitered, using every bit of cover and dead space the way trained operators did. She recognized Chen in the lead, his movement pattern familiar from countless training exercises they had run together. And beside him, 3 contractors she did not know but whose bearing screamed special operations background, the kind of effortless competence that came from years of moving through hostile territory. They hit the cabin with flashbangs and precision fire, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm defenders quickly through violence of action and shock effect. The concussion grenades went off with sound and fury, designed to disorient and confuse, to create the chaos in which assaulters operated most effectively. But Hannah was not where they expected her to be, was not in the cabin at all. She had repositioned to a fighting position Hawk had identified during their first days at the safe house, a rocky outcrop 50 meters from the structure that offered overlapping fields of fire and defilade from ground-level approaches. The firefight was brief and brutal, measured in seconds but feeling like hours in the way that combat always distorted time. Hannah engaged from concealment, her first shots dropping one of the contractors before they realized she was not in the cabin, before they understood that their intelligence was wrong and their assault plan compromised. The man went down hard and did not get up, his body armor defeated by precision shot placement that targeted the gaps where plates did not cover. The others scattered, seeking cover and returning fire with the automatic responses of people who had survived firefights before, but they were exposed in the kill zone Hawk had carefully mapped during their planning sessions, caught in the open with no good options for cover or concealment. Then Hawk's truck appeared on the access road, and Hannah's heart sank like a stone in water. He was driving straight into the ambush, unaware of what was waiting, coming home to what he thought was secure location, but which had become fatal funnel. She tried to warn him through radio, keying her mic and shouting warnings, but he was not monitoring their frequency, had probably turned off his radio to maintain operational security during his supply run. Chen and the remaining contractors shifted their fire to the approaching vehicle with the efficiency of people who recognize opportunity when they saw it. Hannah watched in horror as they riddled the truck with bullets, full automatic fire that turned the windshield into spiderweb of cracks and punched holes through the door panels. She saw the truck swerve violently as rounds found Hawk or disabled steering, watched it crash into a boulder with the sickening crunch of metal on stone, saw Hawk stumble out with blood streaming from a head wound that painted the side of his face crimson. But he was alive, and he was fighting, coming up shooting with the automatic responses of someone who had survived countless firefights through muscle memory and sheer refusal to quit. Hawk's marksmanship was still deadly despite his injuries, despite blood in his eyes and the disorientation of head trauma. He dropped another contractor with two quick shots that showed none of the hesitation that blood loss should have caused, then threw himself behind the wrecked truck as Chen and the final attacker concentrated fire on his position, rounds sparking off metal and punching through already damaged panels. Hannah engaged from her outcrop, trying to take pressure off Hawk, her shots forcing the attackers to split their attention and seek cover. But the angles were wrong and the remaining attackers were well trained, moving in coordinated patterns that spoke of countless hours practicing exactly this kind of close-quarters battle. They split their fire with professional efficiency, keeping both Hannah and Hawk pinned down while maneuvering for better positions, using fire and movement the way special operations units drilled endlessly. The final contractor tried to flank Hawk's position, sprinting between cover points with the speed and confidence of someone who thought he understood the geometry of the engagement. Hannah killed him with a shot that would have made her instructors proud, a snapshot at moving target that caught him mid-stride and dropped him before he could reach the position he was trying to gain. But the kill left her exposed for a critical second as she transitioned targets, and Chen saw the muzzle flash that revealed her position, returned fire with accuracy that spoke of his own considerable skills. His rounds impacted close enough that rock chips cut her face, sharp fragments that drew blood and forced her to drop back into cover to avoid taking more serious damage. She dropped back behind the outcrop, and when she looked up, Chen had used those seconds to close the distance to Hawk's position. She heard shots, the distinctive crack of rifle fire at close range, then a horrible silence that felt like the world ending. Her radio crackled with Hawk's voice, weak but still fighting, still trying to complete the mission even as his life leaked out onto the desert floor. Hannah, he transmitted, his breathing labored and wet in a way that suggested lung damage, probably a sucking chest wound from the way the words bubbled. I am hit. Bad. Chen got me. Cannot hold much longer. Maybe minutes. Hannah tried to move, tried to get to him, scrambling down from the outcrop with tactical discipline forgotten in the face of desperation. But Chen had positioned himself where he could cover both Hawk and the approach from her location, firing controlled bursts that forced her back into cover. She was pinned down, unable to help while the man who had become her father died meters away. So close, she could probably have thrown a rock and hit his position, but as unreachable as if he were on the moon. Go, Hawk transmitted, and there was finality in his voice that made Hannah's blood run cold. Get out. Get to Arizona. Finish this. For your father, for my son, for all of us who believed in something. I cannot leave you, Hannah said, tears streaming down her face and mixing with the blood from the rock cuts. Not like this. Not alone. You have to, Hawk replied, his voice fading in a way that suggested he was losing the fight to stay conscious. I am done. Old, broken. My war is over. Yours is just beginning. Finish it, Hannah. Make it mean something. Make it count for something. She heard more shots, heard Hawk grunt with pain that he tried to suppress but could not fully hide. Then his voice came through one last time, barely a whisper that she almost missed through the static and her own sobbing. Proud of you. So proud. Tell Michael I tried to be better. Tell him I got it right at the end. The radio went silent with the kind of finality that needed no confirmation. Hannah wanted to scream, wanted to charge down and kill Chen and die fighting beside Hawk. But she had made him a promise, had sworn she would finish what her father started. And Hawk had just given his life to buy her the escape she needed. She withdrew through the route they had planned for exactly this scenario, moving through terrain that concealed her from Chen's position. Behind her, she heard a final burst of gunfire, then silence. She knew without looking that Hawk was gone. Hannah made it to the backup vehicle they had stashed a mile from the safe house, an old pickup truck registered to a name that did not exist. She drove through the night with tears blurring her vision, the pain of loss so acute that breathing felt like drowning. By dawn, she was 200 miles away, alone in a motel room with nothing but her weapons and the crushing weight of failure. She had gambled everything and lost. Hawk was dead. Her career was over. Her reputation was destroyed. Garrett was free and defiant, and the truth that she had tried to expose was buried under questions about her own credibility. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed with her pistol in her hands, thinking about how easy it would be to end the pain. One round, quick, final. No more ghosts, no more guilt, no more fighting a battle she could not win. She raised the pistol, placed the barrel under her chin. Her finger found the trigger. Then her phone buzzed with a text message. She lowered the gun and looked at the screen. Unknown number. The message was brief. Master Chief Sullivan's sacrifice will not be wasted. Garrett is at his Arizona ranch. 47 security personnel, professional mercenaries. But there is weakness. Service tunnel from old mine shaft, 800 meters from compound. Blueprints attached. Make him pay. Your friend did not die for nothing. Signed V. Volkov, the Russian who had hunted her and respected her enough to give her a chance. Hannah stared at the message for a long time. Then she set down the pistol and opened the attached files. Detailed architectural plans of Garrett's ranch compound, security rotation schedules, even thermal imaging showing heat signatures inside the buildings. It was everything she needed to get inside, everything she needed to finish this. She thought about Hawk's last words. Finish it. Make it mean something. She thought about her father, who had died standing up for what was right. She thought about the 9 people she had killed, and the possibility that some of them had been innocent, that Garrett had used her the way he used Chen and countless others. Hannah stood and began to pack. She retrieved her gear from the truck, checked her weapons, loaded ammunition. She recorded a video message on her phone to be automatically uploaded to multiple news outlets if she did not check in every 24 hours. A dead man's switch, ensuring that if Garrett killed her, the truth would still get out. I am Staff Sergeant Hannah Price, she said to the camera. What you have heard about me is true. I have killed. I have operated in shadows. But I was manipulated by a man I trusted. Colonel James Garrett murdered my father and used me as a weapon. If you are watching this, I did not survive my mission to stop him, but I hope I succeeded in exposing him. For my father, for Master Chief Robert Sullivan, who died protecting me, for every warrior who has been used and discarded by people like Garrett. Semper Fidelis. She uploaded the video to a secure server with automatic release protocols, then gathered the last of her equipment. Ammunition, medical supplies, communications gear, everything she needed for an operation with no support and no backup. As she loaded the truck, she found something in the glove compartment that made her throat tighten. A letter in Hawk's handwriting with her name on the envelope. She opened it with shaking hands. Hannah, the letter began, if you are reading this, I am probably dead. Do not grieve too long. I have lived 58 years, and most of them were good. I got to serve my country, I got to know good people, and in the end, I got to help someone who reminded me why I put on the uniform in the first place. You are not what Garrett made you. You are what your father hoped you would become. Strong, principled, willing to stand for something bigger than yourself. Do not let Garrett or anyone else convince you otherwise. Finish what we started. Not for revenge, though God knows he deserves it, but for justice. For all the people he has used and all the ones he might use in the future. Stop him. Then go live a life worth the sacrifices made to preserve it. You called me Dad. That meant more to me than you know. I failed my son, but maybe in helping you, I redeemed some of that failure. Maybe Michael would be proud of the man I was at the end, even if I was not always the father I should have been. Be safe, be smart, and when you take that final shot, aim for justice, not revenge. That is what separates warriors from killers. Love, Hawk. Hannah folded the letter carefully and placed it in her chest pocket, next to her father's dog tags that she had recovered from Garrett's house. 2 fathers, one by blood, one by choice. Both dead because they stood for something. She would not let their deaths be meaningless. As the sun rose over the desert, Hannah Price climbed into the truck and pointed it toward Arizona, toward Garrett, toward the final confrontation that would end with either justice or death. She was done running, done hiding, done operating in shadows. It was time to step into the light, even if the light was muzzle flash and burning buildings and the terrible cost of standing alone against evil. Hawk had given his life to give her this chance. Her father had died believing that truth mattered more than survival. Now it was her turn to prove that their faith was not misplaced. The warrior's path had never been about survival. It had always been about what you were willing to die for. Hannah Price knew her answer. Honor, truth, justice. The things her father died for, the things Hawk died for. the thing she would kill for or die trying. The truck rolled through the desert as the sun climbed higher, carrying a lone warrior toward a battle she might not survive but could not avoid. Behind her, the wreckage of her old life burned away to ash. Ahead, an uncertain future waited to be written in blood and fire. But for the first time since she was 8 years old, Hannah Price was choosing her own path, defining her own mission, serving her own conscience rather than someone else's agenda. Win or lose, live or die, she would do it on her terms. That was worth any cost. That was everything. The road stretched ahead into the heat shimmer, and Hannah drove toward whatever waited at the end, armed with nothing but skills honed by years of training, weapons cleaned and loaded, and the terrible resolve of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Garrett had taken everything from her: her father, her innocence, her career, her reputation, and now Hawk. Time to take something back. Time to finish it. The shepherd's daughter was coming home to the wolf's den, and only one of them would walk away. The desert outside Phoenix looked like Mars in the pre-dawn darkness, all rust-colored rock and scrub vegetation that seemed too stubborn to acknowledge the hostility of the landscape. Hannah had been studying Garrett's ranch compound through night vision optics for 6 hours, watching the security rotations with the patience that Hawk had taught her, mapping the patterns that Volkov's intelligence had predicted. The compound sprawled across 20 acres of high desert, a fortress disguised as a retirement ranch, all adobe walls and red tile roofs hiding reinforced concrete and bulletproof glass. 47 security personnel, Volkov had said, professional mercenaries who rotated in 12-hour shifts and moved with the coordination of former military operators. Hannah counted them through her scope, verifying numbers against the intelligence package. 38 visible, which meant 9 were either inside the main house or positioned at points she could not observe from her current location. The math was simple and brutal. She was one person against nearly 50 trained fighters on ground they knew and had fortified. Suicide mission, anyone rational would conclude. But Hannah had stopped being rational somewhere around the moment she watched Hawk die over the radio, stopped caring about odds or survival when she found his letter in the glove compartment. This was not about coming home alive. This was about finishing what her father started and honoring what Hawk had died for. If she survived, it would be bonus. If she did not, at least she would die standing for something. The mine shaft entrance was exactly where Volkov's blueprints indicated, 800 meters northeast of the main compound, hidden in a wash that seasonal rains had carved into the desert floor over centuries of flash floods that turned dry arroyos into raging torrents. The shaft had been part of a copper mining operation that went bust in the 1950s, abandoned and forgotten by everyone except whoever had done the security planning for Garrett's compound. They had turned the old mine into a service tunnel for utilities, running power and water and communications through passages that had been dug a century ago by men who probably died young from silicosis and cave-ins, men whose bones might still be down there in collapsed sections that no one bothered to excavate. Hannah entered the mine at 4 in the morning, moving through darkness with night vision, turning the world into shades of green that made everything look alien and threatening. The tunnel smelled of mineral deposits and stale air that had not circulated properly in decades, and something organic that might have been bat guano, or might have been the decomposition of things that had crawled down here to die. She moved slowly, testing each step for stability before committing her weight, aware that old mines were death traps of unstable ground and poisonous gas pockets that could kill you before you knew you were in danger. Every few meters, she stopped to check air quality with a small detector clipped to her vest, watching the readout for carbon monoxide or methane or any of the dozen gases that accumulated in sealed spaces. The device stayed green, indicating safe levels, but Hannah trusted it only so far. Technology failed, sensors malfunctioned, and dead miners had probably trusted their equipment right up until the moment the bad air took them. The tunnel ran straight for 600 meters, timber supports visible in the green wash of her night vision, some rotted and sagging under the weight of earth above. Hannah gave those sections wide berth when she could, moving quickly through areas where the ceiling looked ready to collapse. The sound of her breathing echoed off stone walls, and she found herself thinking about tons of rock suspended above her head, held up by 100-year-old wooden beams and faith that physics would continue to favor structural integrity over gravitational inevitability. Then the tunnel branched, offering two choices that looked identical in the monochrome green of night vision. Hannah took the left fork as Volkov's blueprints indicated, following a passage that narrowed progressively until she had to turn sideways in places to squeeze through gaps that felt like the earth was trying to swallow her. Her pack scraped against stone, the sound abnormally loud in the enclosed space, and she fought the panic response that wanted to turn her around and send her running back to open air and skeet and room to breathe. Claustrophobia had never been an issue for Hannah in her years of training and operations, but something about being underground in unstable century-old passages triggered primal fears that training could not completely suppress. She forced herself to breathe slowly and deliberately, using the technique Hawk had taught her for managing stress responses, counting breaths and focusing on the immediate task rather than the larger implications of being trapped underground in hostile territory. After 30 minutes of crawling and squeezing, and occasionally having to remove her pack to fit through particularly narrow sections, Hannah encountered a cave in that had partially blocked the passage. Loose rock and timber formed a barrier that she would have to dig through or find a way around. She spent precious minutes examining the obstruction, calculating whether it was stable enough to disturb or whether touching it would bring the whole section down on her head. Finally, she began removing rocks one at a time, setting each one aside carefully and watching for signs that the pile was shifting or settling. It was painstaking work that made her shoulder muscles burn and her breathing labored in the thin air. Sweat dripped into her eyes despite the cool temperature underground, and she found herself counting rocks like meditation, each one removed bringing her closer to the opening she needed. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, she created a gap large enough to squeeze through. Hannah pushed her pack ahead and followed, scraping skin off her elbows and hips as she forced herself through an opening that seemed to get smaller the more committed she became. For one horrible moment, she stuck halfway, unable to move forward or back, and pure animal panic surged through her before she forced it down and twisted her body at a different angle, finding the geometry that let her complete the passage. On the far side, Hannah lay on the tunnel floor for a full minute, breathing hard and fighting the urge to laugh or cry or scream. This was insanity. This was suicide. This was everything Hawk would have told her not to do if he were alive to counsel caution. But Hawk was dead, and Garrett was responsible, and some things mattered more than survival or sanity. Hannah picked herself up, checked her equipment, and continued deeper into the mountain. A metal grate set into concrete, rusty but intact, with a padlock that looked like it had not been opened in years. She picked the lock with tools from her kit, working by feel in the darkness, and eased the grate open slowly to minimize noise. Beyond the grate was a basement utility room, concrete walls and ceiling, filled with electrical panels and water heaters and AC equipment that hummed with mechanical life. Hannah pulled herself through the opening and took stock. She was inside the compound, past the outer security, in a space that the guards probably checked once a shift at most. The real challenge was getting from here to wherever Garrett was sleeping without alerting the small army between her and her target. She spent 20 minutes moving through the basement, clearing rooms with the methodical precision of someone who understood that speed got you killed, but hesitation got you killed faster. The basement was larger than she expected, a warren of storage rooms and mechanical spaces, and what looked like a wine cellar stocked with bottles that probably cost more than Hannah made in a year. She found a stairwell and ascended slowly, her suppressed pistol leading the way, every sense dialed to maximum alertness. The ground floor was decorated like something from a magazine spread on Southwestern living. Tile floors and exposed beam ceilings, Native American art on walls, leather furniture that looked expensive and rarely used. But the windows were bulletproof glass and the doors were reinforced steel disguised with a wood veneer, and Hannah spotted at least 3 security cameras covering the main hallways. This was a fortress pretending to be a home, designed to project one image while serving a completely different function. She moved like a ghost through rooms that smelled of leather and gun oil and expensive cigars, following the mental map she had memorized from Volkov's blueprints. The master bedroom was on the second floor, East Wing, with its own security system and direct access to a panic room that could withstand sustained assault. If Garrett was anywhere, he would be there. But when Hannah finally reached the master bedroom after 40 minutes of careful infiltration, After disabling 2 security sensors and avoiding 3 patrol routes, she found the room empty. The bed was made with military precision, untouched. Garrett was not here, had not been here tonight. She felt the wrongness of it settle in her gut like cold lead. This was too easy. The security was professional but not paranoid. The patrols regular but not random. Everything designed to stop an assault but not an infiltration. Because Garrett had not expected her to get inside. He had expected her to do something else. Hannah moved to the desk and found what she was looking for. A laptop closed but still warm from recent use. She opened it and found it unlocked, displaying the last thing Garrett had been looking at. Security camera footage from a location that made Hannah's blood run cold. Derek Price's gravesite, the small military cemetery outside Phoenix where her father was buried. Multiple camera angles showing the entire cemetery, all of them live feeds, all of them recording. And sitting in the center of the frame, clearly visible in infrared, was a single figure. Garrett, dressed in marine dress blues, sitting beside Derek's headstone like he was keeping vigil. A piece of paper lay on the keyboard, a note written in Garrett's distinctive handwriting. Hannah, if you are reading this, then you are better than I gave you credit for. No one has ever penetrated my compound security. I am impressed, but you are looking in the wrong place. I am waiting for you where it all began, where I ended your father and can end you. Come alone, come unarmed, or I will destroy his body, burn it, erase him from history. You have 1 hour. Hannah felt rage surge through her like electricity, hot and consuming. Garrett was using her father's memory as bait, desecrating Derek's grave with his presence, turning sacred ground into battlefield. Every instinct screamed at her to go, to confront him, to end this. But she forced herself to think, to analyze, to consider what Hawk would say if he were here. This is a trap, obviously a trap. Garrett wants you emotional, reactive, sloppy. He is giving you exactly what you want, which means it is exactly what you should not take. Hannah stood in the empty bedroom, weighing options that all seemed to lead to the same conclusion. She could stay here, wait for Garrett to return, try to ambush him on his home ground. But the note suggested he would not return until she showed at the cemetery. She could leave, abandon the confrontation, but then Garrett would remain free to use others the way he had used her. Or she could go to the cemetery and face whatever waited there, accepting the risk because some things mattered more than survival. She thought about her father who had filed that war crimes report, knowing it would cost him everything. She thought about Hawk, who had given his life to buy her the chance to finish this. She thought about all the people Garrett had used and would continue to use if someone did not stop him. The choice was not really a choice at all. Hannah left the compound the same way she entered, through the mine tunnel and out into the pre-dawn desert. She drove toward Phoenix with Hawk's letter in her pocket and her father's dog tags around her neck, armed despite Garrett's demand, but knowing she would probably have to surrender her weapons to get close to him. The sun was rising as she reached the cemetery, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson that seemed too beautiful for what was about to happen. The cemetery was small and quiet, maybe 150 graves scattered across manicured lawn that seemed impossibly green in the desert. Most were veterans from various wars, their headstones marking service in conflicts that stretched back to World War II. Derek Price's grave was near the back, beneath a mesquite tree that provided shade even in the harsh Arizona sun. Garrett sat beside the headstone in full marine dress blues, his uniform immaculate and his bearing straight despite his 67 years. He looked like something from a recruiting poster. The image of the warrior statesman, honor and service embodied in a man who had murdered his best friend and corrupted that friend's daughter. Hannah parked 50 meters away and approached on foot, her hands visible and empty, her weapons left in the truck as demanded. She had her concealed backup piece, a small 9mm tucked at the small of her back, but she suspected Garrett knew it was there and was allowing it as part of whatever game he was playing. As she got closer, she saw other details. Garrett's rifle, Derek's old M40 that he had carried in multiple deployments, leaning against the headstone like some kind of obscene memorial. A thermos of coffee and 2 cups, suggesting Garrett had been here for hours, waiting with the patience of someone who knew his quarry would come. "You came," Garrett said as Hannah stopped 10 meters away. "I knew you would. You are your father's daughter in that way. Predictable. Bound by honor even when honor gets you killed." You are sitting on my father's grave, Hannah said, her voice flat and cold. Get up. Garrett smiled, an expression without warmth or humor. Or what? You will shoot me? You are unarmed, Hannah. I can see that from here. And even if you were armed, you would not shoot me. Not here. Not on your father's grave. It would desecrate the very thing you came to protect. He was right, and they both knew it. Hannah could not draw and fire. Not in this place. Not like this. The symbolism mattered too much. The meaning of the location constraining her actions more effectively than any physical barrier. Why? Hannah asked, the question that had haunted her since she found Derek's dog tags in Garrett's drawer. Why kill him? You say it was about the war crimes report, about protecting your men. But there is more, is not there? What are you not telling me? Garrett stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. He picked up Derek's rifle and held it like he was remembering how it felt in his hands, how his friend had carried this weapon through multiple deployments. Your father was going to take you away, Garrett said, his voice carrying weight that spoke of old pain and older anger. After he filed the report, after he decided to destroy our team, he was going to resign his commission and take you far from military life. He said, and here Garrett's voice took on a bitter edge, he said you deserve better than to grow up around warriors. Said he did not want you to end up like us, damaged, broken, haunted by ghosts. Hannah felt something click into place, the final piece of a puzzle she had not known she was solving. You killed him because he was going to take me away from you. I killed him because he was weak, Garrett said, but there was something in his eyes that suggested truth more complicated than the words. I killed him because he thought he could just walk away from what we were, what we had built together. I killed him because he chose you over the mission, over the team, over everything we stood for. He chose being a father over being a warrior, Hannah said quietly, and you could not forgive him for that. Garrett's expression hardened. I saved you. Your father would have turned you into some civilian, some ordinary person with ordinary life. I made you extraordinary. I gave you purpose, discipline, skills that 99% of the population will never have. I honored his memory by making you better than he ever was. You made me a weapon, Hannah said. You made me kill people for your agenda. You took an 8-year-old girl and spent 18 years turning her into something my father would have hated. Your father was a fool, Garrett snapped. He did not understand that sometimes you have to do terrible things to accomplish necessary goals. He did not understand that war requires warriors willing to get their hands dirty, willing to cross lines that civilians think should never be crossed. He understood that there are lines that should not be crossed, Hannah replied. That is why he reported you. That is why he was going to take me away. Because he saw what you were becoming and he wanted to protect me from it. And look how that turned out, Garrett said with bitter triumph. He died and you became exactly what I wanted you to be anyway. All his sacrifice, all his principles, they meant nothing in the end. I won, he lost. That is the only measure that matters. Hannah felt something strange happen inside her, a shift in perspective that changed how she saw the man standing before her. Garrett was not some evil mastermind or irredeemable monster. He was broken, damaged by decades of war and violence and decisions that had cost him his humanity piece by piece, until nothing remained but the shell of a warrior who had forgotten what he was fighting for. You did not win, Hannah said softly. You lost everything. Your reputation is destroyed. Your empire is crumbling. You have no one left who cares about you. You are sitting on the grave of the man you murdered because you have nowhere else to go. Garrett's hands tightened on Derek's rifle. I have you. You came back. That means something. I came back to stop you, Hannah said. To finish what my father started. Not because I care about you, but because I care about preventing you from destroying anyone else. Then do it, Garrett said, and suddenly his tone changed, became almost pleading. Shoot me. Kill me. End this. I am tired, Hannah. So tired of carrying all of this. Your father haunts me every night. I see him in my dreams, asking me why. I cannot answer him. I do not even know anymore why I did it, why any of it seemed to matter so much. For the first time, Hannah saw past the warrior facade to the man beneath, and what she saw was someone who had been consumed by his own darkness, who had made choices that could not be unmade, and committed acts that could not be forgiven. Garrett was not evil. He was broken beyond repair, and some part of him knew it. I am not going to kill you, Hannah said. That is what the old me would have done, the weapon you created. But I am not her anymore. Before Byron could respond, Hannah heard movement behind her. She turned to see Sergeant David Chen emerging from behind a monument, his rifle trained on her center mass. His presence was not a surprise. This was Garrett's game, and of course he would have backup. Chen looked worse than when Hannah had last seen him at the safe house. His face was drawn with exhaustion and something that looked like despair. His eyes haunted in a way that suggested he had not slept since Hawk died. His rifle was steady, but his expression wavered between determination and doubt. David, Hannah said quietly, you do not have to do this. Colonel Garrett says I do, Chen replied, but his voice lacked conviction. He says you are going to destroy everything we built, that you will send good people to prison because you cannot handle what we are. We are murderers, Hannah said. We killed people for money while pretending it was patriotism. How many of your targets were actually threats, David? How many were just obstacles to Garrett's business interests? They were all threats, Chen said, but he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. Colonel Garrett verified every target. He showed us the intelligence, the justifications. He showed you what you wanted to see, Hannah replied, what you needed to believe to keep pulling the trigger. I did the same thing. I believed him because it was easier than questioning, easier than accepting that I was being used. Chen's rifle wavered slightly. Master Chief Sullivan died because of you, because you could not leave well enough alone, because you had to expose everything. Hawk died because Garrett sent you to kill him, Hannah said, and her voice cracked despite her efforts to stay controlled. Hawk died protecting me from you, from the person Garrett turned you into. Do not put that on me. That is on Garrett. That is on you for pulling the trigger. Chen flinched as if she had struck him. I followed orders. My father died refusing to follow illegal orders, Hannah said. Hawk died trying to do the right thing. You followed orders and killed a man who was trying to help me expose the truth. Those are choices, David. You made them. Own them. The rifle in Chen's hands began to shake. I did not want to. He was a warrior. He deserved better. Then honor him now, Hannah said. Put down the rifle. Choose different path. It is not too late. For a long moment, Chen stood frozen, rifle aimed at Hannah, but his finger outside the trigger guard, his whole body radiating the tension of someone balanced on a knife's edge between two choices. Behind Hannah, Garrett watched with the calculating expression of someone who had bet everything on his protege's loyalty. Then Chen turned, his rifle swinging to aim at Garrett instead of Hannah. The betrayal was so smooth and unexpected that Garrett did not react fast enough to stop it. He stared at Chen with something like shock, seeing his creation turn against him the way Hannah had. David, Garrett said, his voice taking on warning edge. What are you doing? Choosing, Chen replied, and his voice was steady now, firm with resolution that came from finally making a decision after months or years of doubt. I am choosing honor over obedience, principle over loyalty, the right thing over the easy thing. You will throw away everything I gave you, Garrett said, everything I taught you, everything you are. You made me a killer, Chen said, but you do not get to define what I am anymore. I define that, starting now. The three of them stood in the cemetery as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the graves. 3 warriors, 3 rifles, 3 different choices embodied. Garrett with Derek's rifle, symbol of the friend he had murdered. Chen with his contractor weapon, symbol of the life he was rejecting. Hannah unarmed but standing straight, symbol of the choice to break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. This is touching, Garrett said, his voice dripping with sarcasm that barely concealed panic. 2 of my students turning against me. But you forget something. I am the one who taught you both everything you know. I am the master here. He moved with surprising speed for his age, bringing Derek's rifle to bear on Hannah. But Chen was faster, his shot cracking across the cemetery and striking Garrett's shoulder, spinning the older man around and sending Derek's rifle clattering to the ground. Garrett went to one knee, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His face contorted with pain and rage and something that might have been pride. Good shot, he gasped. I taught you well. Chen did not respond, just kept his rifle trained on Garrett while backing toward Hannah. We need to go, now, before his security responds to the shot. But Hannah was staring at Garrett, seeing him vulnerable for the first time, seeing the man behind the legend reduced to bleeding and beaten. And in that moment, she had to make her own choice. The choice between justice and vengeance, between her father's path and Garrett's. She walked toward Garrett slowly, picking up Derek's rifle from where it had fallen. The weapon was familiar in her hands, weighted with memory and meaning. Her father had carried this rifle, had trusted it, had probably been holding it when Garrett shot him in the back. Hannah could end it now. One round, justice for her father, revenge for Hawk, closure for herself. She aimed the rifle at Garrett's head. Her finger found the trigger. And then she remembered Hawk's words from his letter. When you take that final shot, aim for justice, not revenge. That is what separates warriors from killers. She remembered her father's principles, honor, integrity, the rule of law. She remembered who she wanted to be instead of what Garrett had made her. Hannah lowered the rifle. No, she said quietly. This ends differently. You do not get to be a martyr. You do not get a warrior's death. You get to face trial, face justice, face every family of every person you had killed, explaining why you thought your agenda was worth their loved one's life. Garrett laughed, a sound wet with blood and bitter with defeat. They will never convict me. I have too many friends, too much dirt on too many people. I will walk free, and you will have accomplished nothing. Maybe, Hannah said, but that is not my choice to make. My choice is whether to become like you or become like my father. I choose my father. She looked at Chen. Call the police. Tell them we have a confession to murder and about 24 other crimes. Give them everything. Chen pulled out his phone with shaking hands and made the call. While they waited for authorities, Hannah sat down beside her father's grave and placed Derek's rifle gently against the headstone. I finished it, Dad, she said quietly. Not the way you would have done it, maybe, but with honor. I hope that counts for something. Garrett, still bleeding and defiant, even in defeat, looked at her with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. You are making a mistake. Without me, without what I taught you, you are nothing. Without you, Hannah replied, I am my father's daughter. That is enough. 6 months later, Hannah stood in front of a classroom at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, looking at 25 young Marines who would form the next generation of scout snipers. They watched her with a mixture of respect and curiosity, aware that they were being taught by someone with a story, but unsure what that story entailed. Some of them had probably heard rumors, fragments of truth mixed with speculation about the instructor who had exposed a decorated colonel and somehow emerged with her career intact. Today, we are going to talk about the weight of the shot, Hannah said, her voice steady and clear, projecting to the back of the classroom with the confidence that came from knowing her subject completely. Not the physics, not the ballistics, the moral weight, the burden you carry every time you put crosshairs on a human being and make the decision to end their life. She paused, making eye contact with each student, letting the silence emphasize the gravity of what she was teaching. Every target you engage, you carry forever. Names, faces, justifications. It is not glory, it is burden. You do not kill because it is easy or because someone orders you to without question. You kill because it is necessary, because it protects those who cannot protect themselves, because all other options have been exhausted and someone's life depends on your willingness to act. The classroom was completely silent. 25 young Marines absorbing words that contradicted much of what they had been taught about following orders and completing missions without hesitation. Hannah understood the cognitive dissonance she was creating, but that was the point. Warriors who never questioned were not warriors. They were weapons, and weapons could be used by anyone who knew how to aim them. One student raised his hand, a young corporal with earnest face and new combat action ribbon on his chest. Staff Sergeant, what if we are given orders to engage targets we are not sure about? What if the intelligence seems questionable? Hannah thought about the 9 people she had killed for Garrett, about targets that may or may not have deserved death, about Hassan Mahmoud, who turned out to be Pakistani intelligence officer rather than terrorist leader. Then you ask questions, she said firmly. You demand clarity, you verify intelligence. You talk to your chain of command and make sure they understand your concerns. And if you cannot get satisfactory answers, if something fundamental feels wrong about the mission or the target or the justification, you refuse the order. Another student looked skeptical, a lance corporal who probably came from family with long military tradition. But that could get you court-martialed. That could end your career. My father served 30 years, and he always said, you follow orders even when you disagree, because that is what good Marines do. Hannah nodded, understanding the conflict. Your father is not wrong about military discipline. Chain of command exists for good reasons. But there is a difference between orders you disagree with and orders that are illegal or immoral. My father was murdered for refusing an illegal order, for reporting war crimes that his commanding officer wanted covered up. He chose integrity over career. He chose conscience over convenience. And yes, it cost him everything. But he died knowing he had done the right thing. That matters more than rank or career or anything else the military can give you. She spent the rest of the class teaching them technical skills, the mathematics of long-range shooting, and the environmental factors that affected bullet flight. Wind reading, barometric pressure, temperature gradients, Coriolis effect, all the variables that turn marksmanship from art into science. But she wrapped every technical lesson in moral framework, ensuring they understood that precision marksmanship was not just about hitting targets, but about hitting the right targets for the right reasons in service of principles worth defending. When class ended, several students approached with questions that went beyond curriculum. "How did you deal with what happened?" one asked quietly. "How did you keep going after everything fell apart?" Hannah thought about the motel room and the gun under her chin, about Volkov's message that pulled her back from the edge, about Hawk's letter that gave her purpose when everything else was gone. "You find something worth living for," she said. "Something bigger than yourself. For me, it was finishing what my father started and honoring what Master Chief Sullivan died to protect. Find your something. Hold on to it when everything else falls away." After the students left, Hannah stayed in the classroom for a while, organizing lesson materials and thinking about how far she had traveled from the scared 8-year-old whose parents died in a car accident. Garrett had tried to turn that grief into weapon, to shape trauma into talent for killing. But somewhere along the way, through her father's example, in Hawk's mentorship and her own choices, the weapon had become warrior again. The tool had remembered it was human. That evening, Hannah attended a ceremony at the federal courthouse in San Diego, where Colonel James Garrett was being sentenced after a trial that had lasted 3 weeks and dominated national news. The jury had deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on multiple charges: murder, conspiracy, racketeering, operating an illegal paramilitary organization, tax evasion, and half a dozen other counts that would ensure Garrett spent whatever remained of his life in federal prison. Hannah sat in the gallery as the judge pronounced sentence: life imprisonment without possibility of parole for the murder of Captain Derek Price. Additional consecutive sentences for the other charges that totaled another 40 years. The mathematical precision of it felt almost obscene, as if justice could be measured in decades and years, rather than in the weight of lives destroyed and trust betrayed. Garrett stood to hear the sentence with military bearing that never wavered. His dress blues traded for orange prison jumpsuit, but his posture still parade ground straight. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing was finalized, Garrett looked directly at Hannah for the first time since the trial began. "I am sorry," he said, and his voice carried none of its usual authority or defiance. "Not sorry for what I did, because I still believe I made necessary choices in impossible circumstances. But sorry for who I became in making those choices. Sorry for using Hannah and David and countless others who trusted me. Sorry for betraying Derek, who was better man than I deserved as friend." The judge was not moved. "Remorse without acceptance of wrongdoing is not remorse," Your Honor said. "It is merely regret at being caught. Take the prisoner away." As marshals led Garrett from the courtroom, he looked at Hannah one final time. Their eyes met, and Hannah saw in his expression something that might have been pride or might have been envy. Pride that his student had surpassed him, perhaps, or envy that she had found path to redemption that remained closed to him. Hannah did not look away. She held his gaze until the courtroom doors closed and Garrett disappeared from view, probably forever. She felt no triumph in his conviction, no satisfaction in his destruction, only a quiet sense of completion, of finishing something that needed finishing regardless of cost. After class, Hannah drove to a small cemetery in Oceanside, not far from the base. She carried a small box that she had been holding onto for months, waiting for the right moment. Master Chief Robert Sullivan's grave was in the military section, surrounded by other warriors who had given everything for their country. The headstone was simple: name, rank, dates of service. It did not mention that he had died protecting someone who needed protecting, that he had chosen to stand for something rather than stand aside. Hannah knelt beside the grave and opened the box. Inside was Hawk's seal trident, the pin he had worn on his uniform for 30 years. that he had given her before his final deployment. She placed it on the headstone with hands that only shook slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for believing in me, for teaching me, for showing me what a father should be." She sat beside the grave for a long time, remembering conversations and lessons and moments of connection that had changed her life. When she finally stood to leave, she felt lighter somehow, as if laying the trident to rest had also laid to rest some of the guilt and grief she had carried. As she walked back to her truck, her phone rang. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Staff Sergeant Price, this is Beth Morrison. I wanted to let you know that Colonel Garrett's trial begins next week. The prosecution has asked if you would be willing to testify." "I will be there," Hannah said. "And there is something else," Morrison continued. "The Marine Corps has decided not to pursue charges against you for your contractor work. They are calling it cooperation in a larger investigation. You are being offered an honorable discharge with full benefits." Hannah felt something loosen in her chest. A tension she had carried for so long, she had forgotten it was there. "Thank you for letting me know." "One more thing," Morrison said. "The article I wrote about your father and Garrett won a journalism award. I wanted to thank you for trusting me with the story. Derek Price deserves to be remembered as the hero he was." After hanging up, Hannah drove back to base with the windows down, letting desert air wash over her. The trial would be difficult. Testifying would require her to relive everything, to confront Garrett again, to have her own actions scrutinized in public. But she would do it. For her father, for Hawk, for every person Garrett had used, and every person he might use in the future if he was not stopped. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Hannah felt like she was walking it with purpose she had chosen rather than purpose that had been chosen for her. She was no longer Garrett's weapon. She was Derek Price's daughter and Hawk Sullivan's legacy. That evening, Hannah returned to her small apartment and found an envelope that had been slipped under her door. No postage, no return address, just her name written in precise Cyrillic script. Inside was a single photograph. Volkov, the Russian counter-sniper, standing beside what looked like a shooting range somewhere in the wilderness. He was holding a rifle and looking at the camera with expression that might have been approval. On the back of the photo, a message in English. "You chose honor. Respect. If you ever need reminding that warriors can have principles, remember our duel. You are a better sniper than I expected. Better person, too. Perhaps that is same thing. Good hunting, Phantom. May we never meet again as enemies. V." Hannah smiled despite herself and placed the photo in a drawer with other mementos. Hawk's letter, her father's dog tags, the newspaper clipping about Garrett's arrest, pieces of a journey that had taken her from darkness into light, from weapon to warrior, from Garrett's creation to her father's daughter. She made herself dinner and ate while watching the sunset over the Pacific, painting the sky in colors that seemed too beautiful to be real. Somewhere out there, Garrett sat in a cell awaiting trial. Chen was working with prosecutors, providing testimony in exchange for reduced charges. Morrison was writing follow-up articles about military contractors and accountability. And Hannah was here, alive and free, and finally at peace with who she was and what she had done. The legacy of violence or the legacy of honor, the wolf's teaching or the shepherd's blood. In the end, there had been no contest. Honor had won because Hannah Price had chosen to make it win, had committed herself fully to that victory regardless of cost. Her father would have been proud. Hawk would have been proud. And for the first time in 18 years, Hannah was proud of herself. Not for the kills she had made or the skills she possessed, but for the choice she made when it mattered most. The choice to break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. The choice to aim for justice instead of revenge. The choice to honor her father's memory by becoming the person he had hoped she would be. The shepherd's daughter had come home to the wolf's den and emerged victorious not through violence, but through the strength to choose mercy when vengeance would have been easier. That was the legacy worth passing on. That was the inheritance worth claiming. That was everything her father had died for, and everything Hawk had given his life to protect. Hannah Price stood at her window and watched the stars emerge, feeling the weight of the past lifting and the promise of the future opening before her like dawn breaking over distant mountains. The war was over. The shepherd's daughter had won, not through the barrel of a rifle, but through the courage to put it down. And that made all the difference. This story hit me differently when I finished writing it. Hannah's choice at that cemetery, lowering her rifle when revenge was right there, That's the kind of decision that separates warriors from killers. I've heard from veterans who face similar moments when doing the right thing cost them everything, but they did it anyway because that's what the oath meant. What would you have done in her position? Would you have taken the shot? And if you've served, did you ever face a moment where honor and survival pulled you in different directions? Your stories matter. Share them below.